we understand how nature's trying to shape New York City, then maybe we can make New York City fit into the nature of the place, and in that way make it possible to live in the city into the next 400 years, and maybe the 400 years after that.
From the sky, it's clear that New York City was boldly built right to the water's edge. It's a coastal city surrounded by water on all sides. Just a century ago, there was more cargo tonnage and people passing through this port than all other major harbors in the country combined. With 578 miles of coastline, all that water is now New York's greatest threat.
The real challenge for us in the 21st century is, can we be as wise as we are smart? We're so smart about so many things. You know, we're so clever, and yet somehow when it actually comes to making the hard decisions, the wise decisions based on what we know, we have trouble doing that. I don't know how many more examples nature needs to give us to do the right thing.
The world's great cities face threats they have never before encountered. New York, Tokyo, London, Miami. The threats come from the sea, from above, and from below. These are the problems and their solutions. For when the water comes.
Mandatory evacuation. All residents are urged to comply with this evacuation request.
In 2012, Superstorm Sandy catches New York by surprise. The city is flooded with 1.6 billion gallons of water containing raw and partially treated sewage. The storm surge, measuring over 13 feet, engulfs New York with over 700,000 tons of debris. It is the worst natural disaster in the city's history. Trevor Holland is a resident and an attorney in a neighborhood called Two Bridges.
On the Lower East Side, it is called Two Bridges because our neighborhood is located between the two bridges, the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge.
The median household income in this inner city neighborhood of 38,000 people is just over $21,000. That's well under half of the average median income of New York City.
It's an affordable neighborhood, working class individuals. We're in a very diverse neighborhood, one of the most diverse in Manhattan. Different economic levels, different races, different creeds, different religion. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love living here.
Two Bridges is situated on New York's floodplain. At 5 to 10 feet above sea level, parts of it will be completely underwater if sea levels rise by 6 feet in the next century, as predicted.
Someone had talked about storm amnesia, and I think that does happen because you forget how bad it was. One of the more vivid scenes I remember is that we take a look in the backyard area where our playground is. There were 3 or 4 homeless people who didn't get the notice that a storm was coming. They don't have cell phones, they're not watching the news. They just realized that the water is rising. And they were basically trapped in that area, and they were standing in water trying to figure out how to get out of this. I remember that vividly, thinking, how many people, they didn't get the news flash that a storm was coming. And they were just sleeping along the river, and then all of a sudden the water came up. And there's their porters. They stayed overnight. They had no choice. This one is actually South Street. This was early in the storm. The water had just come over the edges. When you think of Manhattan, you kind of think of all apartment buildings. You don't really think that, you know, a building flooding, you know, especially in our particular neighborhood. This was the point where we could no longer enter the street. I mean, this is the side of the building, and that's actually a sidewalk you can see on the right side. It had already come up to the 4-foot wall that is outside of our building. And looking down into the street, a sea of water, a river of water.
Two Bridges got slammed by the storm surge in 2012, and it will be slammed again.
We know that there's going to be another big hurricane that hurricane could come next year, and they're going to blame the politicians for not acting fast enough. We have to recognize that climate change is here. We know that there's going to be sea level rise, and we know that storms are getting more intense. We should find ways as a society for people to live in a safe way. We're so creative about our science. But somehow we haven't really brought our full suite of creativity to this question.
This place is on the edge. It's on the edge of the continent. And that's what makes New York City so special, and that also is what's threatening New York City going into the future.
New York City faces two challenges. The first is the inevitable fact that the city lies in a hurricane zone, and storms will continue to come no matter what.
My kids are 10 and 15. They know that they're gonna have to live with this the rest of their lives. I think this is something that is embedded in us as people who've had to live through it.
The second is rising sea levels.
I think that people in New York understand that sea level is rising and that it's a critical problem. How much it's rising and how we'll adapt, those are still open questions.
The challenges are clear, but what are the solutions? How can New York adapt and survive?
We're going to go out and we're going to just swap one instrument, put in a new, fresh instrument, so we get good quality measurement.
Philip Orton works on the front line of the effort to measure the rising seas. He monitors the Hudson River, gathering present-day data to predict and maybe prevent future catastrophe.
We've got a buoy offshore. It's got a sonde, an instrument that has many sensors on it, that's measuring pH, the oxygen, salinity of the water, temperature of the water, water elevation. And there's instruments all up and down the Hudson that'll send the data to the internet, which we take into our database. We collect the data for the forecast model. Much like with the weather forecast, you can merge the best information you have to form the initial conditions in order to launch your next forecast.
These gauges help Orton understand which parts of the city are most at risk when the next big storm or hurricane hits. After Sandy, Orton's data was used in modeling to see what New York would look like with 6 feet of sea level rise by 2100.
So this is a satellite map showing New York City without any flooding. Shown here is Broad Channel, the Rockaways, Lower Manhattan, and over here is Staten Island. If you get 6 feet of sea level rise, the everyday average high tide is going to start flooding a lot of neighborhoods. It's high tide in 2100. This is now showing tidal flooding of places like South Street Seaport, Lower Manhattan, a lot of flooding around Jamaica Bay, also on Staten Island. Hundreds of thousands of people being flooded at that point. It's uninhabitable when you start getting flooded so many times per year. That's tidal flooding, but then there's also storm surges. We can also look at what 2100 would hold if we had a very severe storm like Hurricane Sandy, plus 6 feet of sea level rise. A much larger percentage of the coastal zone is flooded. The west side of Manhattan, the Tribeca district, Wall Street, Battery Park, Lower East Side.
Sandy flooded 51 square miles, 17% of the city. With 6 feet of sea rise, those numbers would be closer to 100 square miles, or about a third of the city underwater.
This kind of flooding would be catastrophic. There's massive infrastructural elements for a city of 8 million people that are in the flood zones. Transportation system, the tunnels, the subways, the electrical system, and of course a lot of these things were flooded just by Hurricane Sandy, so if you envision 6 feet of sea level rise, then a great deal more is at risk at that point. The whole city could be disabled in this kind of flood scenario. It's almost certain if we don't reduce our carbon dioxide emissions that we'll have sea level rise of that scale in the 22nd century. New York City's 300 years old. At this rate, we won't make it to another 300 years.
When we designed and built New York, we did not think of floods and storms.
New York's century-old subway system is a disturbing example of the challenges the city faces from rising seas and powerful storms. The subway moves almost 6 million people every day, the largest transit service in the country. With 840 miles of track, enough to stretch all the way to Chicago. But it's now in critical need of maintenance as New York adapts to the perils of climate change.
This is the South Ferry Station. Water entrance actually through this entrance. I went all the way down the stairs and flooded the entire station. There was actually 3-4 feet of water on the mezzanine. Everybody was surprised that the whole station got flooded. Nobody anticipated that much water coming in and actually flooding the whole station. First of all, there was an urgency to get service back. So there was urgency to get all of the water out, pump everything. There was like 7 or 8 million gallons of water that had to be pumped out. And it took weeks to pump it out. So once they pumped out all of the water, then the station was assessed to see what was damaged and what had to be done.
Joe Loda is the chairman of the Metropolitan Transit Authority. He says that the city's 14 submerged subway tunnels are in jeopardy due to storm surge and rising seas.
The subway system was built over about 115 years ago now. And when they opened it, I don't think they ever envisioned the rising tides that we're experiencing now in the 21st century. Pretty much all of our tunnels were damaged, not just the actual rail equipment, but the side of the walls. We had South Ferry Station here in Lower Manhattan, pretty much brand new, completely renovated, that was completely destroyed. The water went all the way up to the steps. It's 2 stories below ground. It was completely flooded. We need to rebuild the system.
Dr. Klaus Jacob is a disaster risk and climate expert. In 2011, he released a study that warned it would only take a single superstorm combined with sea level rise to flood and destroy the city's most vulnerable subway tunnels.
We did these studies in close cooperation with the engineering staff of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, whose subdivision runs the subway system, looking not only at the present but for the 2030s, 2050s, 2080s, and the end of the century. Our focus really was climate change and how would New York City adapt to that rising sea level with storms superimposed on top. Our results showed that the Achilles heel of New York City would be the subway system. We had computed that it would take only about 40 minutes to fill whatever can be filled. But if you have 6 feet of water already in addition, a city like New York City has no choice but to take action.
The subway is just one of several critical infrastructure assets New York City has to protect from rising sea levels and powerful storms.
It's a $7 to $8 billion problem. It's not just the subways. We also have numerous bridges and tunnels. We also have the commuter rail lines, Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, that we need to make resilient because that's how people get to and from work, to and from school. They're the arteries that allow the lifeblood of the metropolitan area to stick together.
New York's population is at its highest in history and shows no sign of declining. 8.6 million people now call the 5 boroughs home, and that population has risen 5.5% since 2010, leading the state in population growth.
I have looked at the evolution of New York City over its 400 years of existence. It has undergone so many mutations. I mean, it did not look anything like it looks now. Why should it look in 100 years anything like it looks now?
Clues to the future challenges New York City faces may be found in its past, in urban development that started over 300 years ago.
I remember getting a call from Bill not all that long after Hurricane Sandy, and he asked if we have maps which show in a really dramatic fashion how the landfill in New York City had an impact on the severity of the storm.
My name is Bill Johnson. In 2012, I was director of the statewide mapping program, part of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. They were hoping that the maps would help them understand the underlying issues related to the storm. And so we started thinking about how we could help her with this work.
My reaction to this kind of request was excitement in that we had means to contribute to helping the city become a more resilient place.
We started thinking about overlays of aerial imagery with historic maps.
We had all of these maps here in digital format already, and we had them stretched over the same geographic grid so that they lined up when we compare them.
Those were the raw ingredients we needed. We had an accurate representation of everything that had changed between 1609 and 2012, as evidenced in an aerial photo. So when we overlay this 1860 map on the 1767, what's immediately apparent is that there's a tremendous expansion. Here's the 1767 shoreline I'm tracing with my finger. So all of this from here out to here is new. We overlay that on the modern map of Manhattan, and you can see how much of Lower Manhattan is actually constructed on the man-made reclaimed land.
An area which was formerly undeveloped is the scene of a project in which employment is provided for both skilled and unskilled workers. A long bulkhead was built to reclaim land from the waters of the bay.
Almost 4 square miles of modern-day Manhattan is built on landfill, added all along the city's coasts.
We took the Sandy storm surge data and overlaid it on top to see if there was alignment between the man-made lands and where the flooding occurred from Sandy. And what we can see is that it very dramatically aligns with the man-made area. What this really reveals is that the flooding from Superstorm Sandy is largely man-made. The flooding occurred largely as a result of 400 years of human activity that basically created a new floodplain. And that floodplain is densely filled with modern urban infrastructure, subway tunnels, power plants, and that's where we saw the damage from flooding from Sandy.
The reclaimed land Johnson identifies is a critical part of the U.S. economy. Banking, finance, technology, communication, insurance. More Fortune 500 companies have offices here than anywhere else on the planet.
We are the financial capital of the country, if not the world. We are the center of arts and media. Many of the media companies for this country, if not the world, are headquartered here. We have to get it right because of what we mean to the economy of the country and the economy of the world. And we need to do better.
Despite dire warnings, 63% of New Yorkers who were under mandatory evacuation stay put through Sandy. Many stay because they have no choice.
That's typical in a lot of the affordable neighborhoods in New York City, and it's a stark contrast to a lot of the other neighborhoods. People just don't have the resources to leave. They shelter in place, and they're used to sheltering in place during the typical disasters that we've had in New York. Where are they going to go?
The city has created new evacuation zones that can accommodate 3 million New Yorkers.
You don't want to put people's lives at risk. You have hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, affected by the decision to evacuate. It is costly as well. You're opening shelters, there's an economic impact, but you have to say life safety is the most important thing. There's certainly always going to be a challenge with people making that decision of do they want to leave their homes. The best thing you can do is tell people you have to take this seriously.
But evacuation is a Band-Aid solution for a life-threatening problem. Rising sea levels that will make parts of the city permanently uninhabitable, unless innovative engineering can make a difference. That takes political will.
My name is Dan Zarilli. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer and the Senior Director for Climate Policy and Programs here in the Mayor's Office. There's been a lot of activity to make sure that we are more aware of what it means to live by the coast, and that sometimes you may get wet, but we're continuing to invest and make sure that we are able to bounce back quicker from those events and that we're building a stronger New York City at the end of this. The vulnerabilities aren't just something that's going to show up in 100 years. They're here, they're now, and we need to invest to mitigate those risks. And that means that we're looking at a full range of coastal defense investments. We're implementing them, new building code regulations, new zoning code regulations, upgrading our infrastructure.
In the search for solutions to save the city, Dan Zarilli has turned to the private sector.
We are not an infrastructure-forward country right now.
Vishaan Chakrabarty is one of the architects and urban thinkers who is tackling the problem head-on.
The last time we were was under President Eisenhower.
The highway construction program initiated by Ike is the biggest peacetime enterprise ever undertaken. It will cost tens of billions.
That was the last time this nation moved a quantum leap forward in terms of its infrastructure, and we haven't done it since.
The elimination of waste spending made a balanced budget possible.
As much as I love New York, our biggest problem in my mind is that we have substandard infrastructure that's over 100 years old. I think we need to really step back and holistically look at all the infrastructure in the city. Do we have train stations that function properly? Do we have subways that can run in these situations? In the world's richest country and the richest city of the world's richest country, are we going to say that we're not going to do something about this?
The question remains, does New York City really need to spend huge sums on expensive mega projects to protect itself from rising sea levels? The answer may lie in a vault in Massachusetts. Historical records reveal evidence of previous megastorms in New York, and researchers look for patterns to determine if they are getting more frequent and worse.
This is the Seafloor Samples Lab. It's a national archive of all the sediment cores that have been taken over the last several decades.
Jeff Donnelly is a senior scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
They're samples from all over the world, tens of thousands of them. We maintain this archive so that scientists can come and resample cores that may have been taken long before they were even born.
These core sediment samples were taken by scientists in New York dating back to 1721.
One of the things that makes New York especially vulnerable to hurricane strikes is the sort of shape of the coastline there. So you've got the bight where New York and New Jersey come together. As a storm comes up the eastern seaboard, it's focusing water into that bight and causing greater levels of storm surge.
Just like tree rings can tell the story of climate change, core sediment samples offer clear signs of powerful hurricanes across the past 300 years.
You can see these really distinctive sand layers here that are deposited within this salt marsh peat. And it's these layers that tell us about the high energy event that occurred. So it's hurricane waves and storm surge overtopping the beach, transporting the beach sand into the salt marsh. We already had well documented the 1821 hurricane, but didn't really have a very good modern analog for which we had modern measurements. Hurricane Sandy provided an opportunity to do a comparison with these earlier events. We know from the documentary record that the storm surge for 1821 was actually even higher than Sandy. It was probably about 14, 15 feet worth of storm surge. The 1821 hurricane hit when sea levels were about 2 feet lower.
Every century, the city gets slammed.
You don't even need a bigger and badder storm than 1821. You have 1821 come back, you've already got to add 2 feet to that just because of the sea level rise that's occurred since then.
Donnelly's findings confirm Superstorm Sandy was not the exception, but the rule, common to every century. In fact, the storm surge in 1821 was 1.5 times the height and strength of Sandy.
They're more of an order of once every 70, 80, 100 years.
New York's population then was just over 120,000 people, most of whom did not live on the water's edge.
In the next century, sea levels forecast to rise at least 3 more feet. So you can imagine how much more infrastructure and people are at risk as every foot sea level rises.
Donnelly's findings confirm that New York has always been hit by hurricanes. The next storm is coming, and more people than ever will be living along New York's coasts when the city floods. This is how New York City's coast looked in 1821, when the last megastorm before Sandy hit. Stark, wild, flat, and vulnerable. It's a salt marsh in New Jersey, 20 miles from Manhattan.
It's interesting to know that sea level goes up and goes down, but if you want to correlate it with climate, you need to know when.
Horton and his team also use core sediment samples to research the prehistoric climate of New York. But instead of focusing on the patterns of sand layers, they look at microscopic organisms to determine if sea levels have risen dramatically in the prehistoric past.
The 4 meters of sediment represents approximately the last 2,000 years of Earth's history. Nice, though. We take these cores back and we try and record precisely how sea level has changed. Has it accelerated? Has it decelerated? And then correlate those with changes in climate. The microfossils that we're looking at under the microscope are single-celled organisms known as foraminifera. Okay, let me have a look.
Horton's looking for microscopic fossils that come from the marsh when the water is at its highest and lowest. The presence of these fossils gives a clear picture of changing sea levels across hundreds of years.
So based upon the changes in the abundance of any individual species tells you how sea level has changed through time.
The research shows that for well over 1,500 years, sea levels were stable. 200 years ago, that changed. Not coincidentally with the Industrial Revolution.
Beginning in the latter part of the 19th century is where sea level accelerated. When we correlate climate and sea level, we see a near perfect relationship. Whenever climate warmed, sea levels accelerated. One of the fundamental questions that as climate scientists we are asked is the modern rates of change unprecedented? We were able to show that the rates of sea level rise in the 20th and the 21st century had not been seen for the previous 2,000 years. The latest projections predict that New York City would receive an upper estimate of sea level of around 2 meters by 2,100, or around 6 feet. We're living in a very, very unusual time. We have a clear choice, and therefore we still have hope. But if we don't make urgent action, then all bets are off.
With a 6-foot sea rise, according to Horton's research, a full 280 square miles of New York will be lost forever, a sunken city. 600,000 New Yorkers will lose their homes. 300,000 jobs will be displaced or lost. The poorest will take the hardest hit, with 12,000 public housing units cut off by the sea. The people working the problem on the ground now seek solutions to rebuild and protect New York for the 22nd century. This is what's called the Big U. It's an ambitious mega project that would protect the $500 billion business sector in Lower Manhattan, the epicenter of the American economy.
My name is Kai-Uwe Bergman.
Uwe Bergman is an architect who leads the Big U project.
We have proposed 10 miles of contiguous flood protection, stretching from West 57th, 58th Streets along the entire coastline to the tip where Battery Park is right now, and then back up the East River to the 30s. That would protect all of the geography that is currently below the flood line.
The Big U is a massive seawall, in places 20 feet high, that would protect the most vital business district in the U.S. from sea level rise of up to 15 feet. Its surface would be primarily parkland, with sports facilities, playgrounds, and bike and walking paths all along the 10 miles of coastline it is designed to protect.
In the case of New York, there was a realization that climate change is something that we need to address. You can think of the Big U as actually a giant gutter, because it also is dealing with all of the rain that's hitting the streets while a hurricane event or a storm event is happening. The Big U has also a contiguous bike trail, so if it were all built out, all 10 miles, you could ride a bicycle for 10 miles and never cross a street. You could say that the coastline of Manhattan is actually going from a working waterfront to one that is about leisure, it's about health and well-being, and making the waterfront accessible.
The Big U will be realized in stages. the first being a 2.5-mile stretch on the Lower East Side. The city has approved the plan with a budget of $305 million. Trevor Holland lives in a neighborhood the Big U would protect. As a lawyer and a resident, he took part in meetings with the developers, who say the project would protect two bridges from the rising sea.
This neighborhood has planning fatigue. We've been through dozens of meetings about what we're gonna do, we're gonna change this, we're gonna add this, and a lot of those plans wind up on the shelves. You go through this process of trying to figure out a way to protect the neighborhood, and you wind up with a nice, big, glossy booklet that sits on the shelf, and nothing happens.
That's not Holland's only problem with the Big U.
We fought so long to get access to the waterfront, and now one of the solutions that they're proposing is to basically close it off. We're gonna build 10-foot walls, all made of concrete, and you'll be protected, good to go. We've been asking, is this the only solution? Is there anything else? Or are we just looking at walls? I mean, what have other cities done?
Holland's not alone. There are others who think the Big U is a step in the wrong direction.
In Rotterdam, they are designing underground parking garages. So if they know a storm is coming, they evacuate the cars, and they build that parking garage so that it can be a water holding tank that holds millions of gallons of water, so that water doesn't go out into the community. And then when the water recedes, they have a mechanism to pump the water out of the parking garage. The parking garage does double duty. So there are ways to design around these problems. I don't think the answer is you're gonna retreat from all of Lower Manhattan. We have to figure out how to build things more resiliently.
Geophysicist Klaus Jacob has other concerns.
How high do you make those seawalls before you are in a prison? And that's not a sustainable solution.
That's a dystopian picture. It's just a wall. And most of it, in fact, is just a concrete and rebar wall. And I think that going in that direction makes our cities more brittle. It's so easy for that wall to break. I mean, I worked in New Orleans for 8 years. Walls break. Unexpected things happen. A barge whacks up against it. There's always something unexpected.
Hill's greatest concern is that all walls eventually have to come down. She believes in building in layers, with every generation contributing to the work done by the last.
A wall, that's rigid, that's fixed in place, the design is only for that specific location. We should spend that same amount of money to put things in place that can be added to. We need to build the foundation for future generations.
Urban architect Pippa Bashir agrees that living behind a wall is a future she cannot imagine.
It's fundamentally going to change the culture. And is that the New York City we want to live in? It's not the New York City I chose to live in. One of my greatest fears for the future of New York City is that we won't get past that protect question.
I'm a little bit of a skeptic of anything that says, oh, we're gonna keep the water out over here, because it's gonna go somewhere. It was conceived of as a big giant wall, and they might have said, well, we're gonna put some grass on it so it'll look nice, but it's still a big giant wall. This notion that we're just gonna build a giant fence around New York City and keep this from happening is not either practical or in some ways ethical.
It's anything but a dumb wall.
Kai-Uwe Bergman welcomes others to come up with a better idea.
It is going to be a place that a person can actually go, inhabit, use 100% of the time, and then be reassured that it's actually protecting them against the sea surges.
He says a short-term radical solution is better than none at all.
I think the biggest risk is not doing anything. Many of these communities have heard repeatedly that something would be done. And I think that the biggest fear is that another storm event would come and flood them out of their homes again, and they have to deal with the loss.
Broad Channel is a little island in Queens in the middle of Jamaica Bay. It is a tiny place. I don't think anybody ever heard of it. Unless you live in, in the area. I talk to a lot of people that live, in Manhattan, and they have no idea where Broad Channel is. I've been here, since I'm 4 years old. Same neighbors I had as growing up are the same neighbors I have today. My wife was born in Broad Channel also. Her whole family's from the town.
For years, Bassetti lived in a world that somehow escaped change. Then, about a decade ago, high tides flooded the streets, even on sunny days.
You just get used to it. The high tide comes up, gotta get my daughter to school, all right, get on my back. You piggyback her up to the corner to get her to school on time. This was a full moon high tide. This picture is one of my favorites. The day I was taking my son home from the hospital, he was just born, he was 3 days old. When you live in Broad Channel, you take off your shoes and you carry him down the block. That is total Broad Channel living right there.
Superstorm Sandy turned the inconvenience into a catastrophe.
You couldn't stop it. There's nothing that could stop that water from coming in.
Bassetti and his family evacuated to Brooklyn and returned 2 days later.
So then when I finally got to my house, I go, well, this ain't that bad. Well, it didn't get bad until we started doing the work, you know. First, all right, let's start throwing out everything that's wet, you know, let's empty out underneath the sinks, underneath the closets, let's get rid of these couches.
By the time they are done, there is nothing left to save. Bassetti joined the city's Build It Back program. With a whopping $2.2 billion budget, Build It Back encourages homeowners and businesses to rebuild higher and stronger, more resilient against the rising seas. The city has replaced over 1,400 homes, repaired and reimbursed 6,500 more, with about 1,000 remaining under construction.
Build It Back is raising the home for me. They're raising the house 11 feet from where it started from, which will put me a few feet above that national flood line. I'm hoping I'm prepared enough. I'm hoping my house is raised high enough where the water comes in and I'm not affected. But who knows, it's Mother Nature. You can't predict what she's gonna do.
Frank is one of thousands who are determined to defend. He'll never leave.
Never even crossed my mind. This is a great place to grow up, and I want my kids to have the same environment. The house behind me is the house that I own.
But there was a second option, managed retreat. New York City and state also encouraged people to stop investing in flood-prone areas and leave the land to revert to its natural state. 600 homeowners took this buyout, including Frank Mashinsky.
Ocean Breeze was pretty much fantastic. It really was. It was paradise. I miss everything about it. Most is the people that we lost.
2 of Mashinsky's neighbors died here during Superstorm Sandy.
It was the ideal spot to put something just to say, hey, we'll never forget you. Both in their 80s, pillars in the community, great people, and just not supposed to die this way. We had a typical white picket fence, front porch right here, and my house would be from right here on back. Paradise, 364 days a year until the day of the storm comes. My house still had about 3 feet of water in it. It was still on the foundation, but it had been completely submerged. So it's devastation. I did go inside, everything was turned upside down, and I knew there was going to be nothing at all savable. And that's when it really hit me. 3 hours and we don't own anything. One of the neighboring areas on the East Shore started talk of a buyout. One day I received a call from the governor's representative. Congratulations, you were very successful. Your area has the option of the New York State buyout.
Homeowners received full market value for their houses in exchange for leaving.
They took the house down, and as you can see, we're standing here, and there's just grass growing right now. It's doing what it was supposed to, going back to nature, and nature is slowly reclaiming it, and then the animals are coming back too.
Some people decided to stay. You know what? It's America. So they have choice. If they want to put themselves in that predicament in their family, that's their choice.
One bold engineering project is giving the coastal communities of Staten Island hope.
What if we just look at this a whole new way, look at the problem a new way, and look for new solutions?
Pippa Brashear is an urban planner and landscape architect. She works with a team that believes the answer is to stop trying to fight the sea, but to learn to live with it, and even harness it to do good, not harm.
The design project that ultimately came out of it was our Living Breakwaters project. The project is located on the southern tip of Staten Island. It was really pummeled by waves during Sandy. Our Living Breakwaters project, it's a system of offshore breakwaters. Each of the individual breakwaters range from about 300 feet long to 450 feet long, and they are spaced along the shoreline to really protect it from the most damaging waves. The largest breakwaters that are positioned to really knock down those large storm waves, they have to be tall enough that they're still peaking above the top of the water when you have those really elevated surge levels like Sandy. And so those crest elevations are at about 14 feet above mean sea level.
Rather than a continuous seawall, the breakwaters are a series of raised surfaces that slow storm surge. It's an old concept, but the ecological element is a new twist.
Much of the breakwaters will be made from stone, but we're also using these bioenhanced concrete armor units to help jumpstart the ecology. The chemical content of the concrete has been adjusted to attract organisms. This is a scale model of one. It's about half the size of what the actual armor units will be, 4 feet by 4 feet. One of the premises that we had was we have to actually restore the environment. Historic habitats, wetlands, oyster reefs have been decimated. Can we recreate that complex aquatic habitat to really build back this environment?
I think the Living Breakwaters project is great. Something flexible. If the rocks don't work right there, you move the rocks, or you make a new pile of rocks. Those strategies we can actually do, and we can export them to other cities. There are opportunities, and there are always going to be surprises, like oysters on those breakwaters. Well, when the ocean is more acid, I don't know about oysters, but something will live on there.
People are looking for ways to buy time.
I'm not sure we can reverse it, but can we slow it down? Yes, I think we can slow it down. At least as far as the subway system and our commuter rails. I'm committed to make them as resilient as possible for what we can expect over the next 100 to next 200 years.
Right now we have about 104 subway entrances that we find are critical facilities that are in the floodplain. We use flex gates, marine doors.
I call them submarine doors. They basically close each entranceway. They get locked in place. They're very heavy doors. Each one weighs about 3,500 pounds.
These can be deployed in relatively quick time to prevent water from entering the subway system. These are stop logs. So what happens is these two beams get locked in place with these pins. They get locked in place, and then as these logs are stacked, the pins slide into this beam, and as they get stacked to the top, this whole area then becomes watertight.
Another innovation is an inflatable plug made of Kevlar and waterproof fabric. The plugs blow up like balloons to block tunnels against flooding. Made from the same materials as the airbags on the Mars rover, strong enough to cushion the spacecraft if it lands on rocks, these tough balloons fill up with 35,000 gallons of air in just 3 minutes. But the airbags need to be perfectly packed and deployed to provide a watertight seal.
I don't think much of the plugs, those round balls that get filled up with air that will plug it and all of that. You need something a little bit better than some kind of plastic or polymer filled with air to be able to block the water. As we all know, water is extremely strong and powerful.
And at $400,000 each, the city decides they are too expensive to plug all 14 of their under-river subway tunnels.
It's very, very important that we recognize that climate change is real. And if you don't want to recognize that climate change is real, we do have to recognize the sheer fact that water seems to be rising. So what do we do to mitigate that? What do we do to mitigate the risks that are involved in that so we can continue to operate? Are we better off than others? It's hard for me to know because I've not done a comparison, but I do know that we're a lot better off today than we were 5 years ago.
The new Whitney Museum in the Meatpacking District appears to be one of the most flood-resistant museums in the country and perhaps the world. It was built for the future, designed to be resilient against rising sea levels and storm surge. Its loading dock is protected by a waterproof flood door, designed and built by naval engineers. The outer concrete wall was reinforced to become 100% waterproof. Like the subway, the museum also has a stop log system, a deployable barricade that can be installed in just 8 hours in advance of an approaching storm. That doubles Sandy's storm surge height in lower Manhattan, but it's in line with future projections. Urban architect Vishaan Chakrabarty believes that the survival of New York depends on designs like the Whitney. It comes down to new buildings that can endure the inevitable rising water that's coming its way.
You make sure the building can flood, which means that you get all of the vulnerable mechanical equipment out of the basement.
We're in the west tower of the American Copper buildings here on the east side of Manhattan. This building is designed around the 100-year floodplain. Our elevators and our mechanical systems, our power service, our pumps, those are all above that elevation.
You make sure that there's a generator in the building that can't power the entire building, but it can power the elevators, it can power at least one outlet in every apartment so you can charge a cell phone, get information and so forth. Have at least enough light to live, maybe keep a refrigerator running.
We're up here on the 48th floor of the West Tower. This should be our penthouse apartment. Sweeping views all over the city, king of the world type of apartment. Instead, we have 2 megawatts of emergency power. We decided we're gonna put the generators up here because by sacrificing the square feet up here, even though we'd be renting them for upwards of $130 or $150 a foot, we figured by not using those square feet as an apartment, we make all the rest of the square feet in the building that much more valuable. Even when there's no commercial power in this building, you would be able to live here.
Those basic things can actually dramatically change what happens during a storm, because if big buildings are equipped to do that, you then don't have this massive exodus of people who are trying to get out of their homes with flooded streets, first responders, all the other things that are happening simultaneously with that crisis. It's not a very high-tech set of solutions. It's actually a fairly low-tech set of solutions.
The lobby is built above the estimated high water mark for flooding. Even so, the building is designed to flood. And when the water recedes, the damage is minimal, and residents can go right back to their lives.
What's unique about this lobby is the material selection. The floor is stone, the walls are concrete, steel, and stone. The portals are all steel. And the wood feature that we wanted in the lobby is set off the walls so that it's actually a vented system. So that if ever did get wet, we wouldn't be doing any sort of demolition and replacement. The expectation was that eventually something will happen and the building will get wet.
Vishaan Chakrabarty has his own mega project under construction in Brooklyn, one of the most ambitious and resilient plans in the history of the 5 boroughs.
Domino Park is a 3 million square foot new neighborhood that's being built on the waterfront in Brooklyn.
Domino is a mixed-use development with 2,800 condo units, 1/4 of them affordable housing. Its main feature is a huge 6-acre park, a 1/4 mile along the waterfront.
We just went out to the community and we were very open and honest with people and said, you know, look, this needs to be more resilient. And so one of the first moves we had made during the master planning process was to pull the buildings back from the water and actually make a bigger park. That resulted in more climate resilience in the long term because that park has a tremendous amount of porous surface grass, plant material that will take on water. So what happens is when a storm hits, it will both slow the energy of the storm and absorb like a sponge a lot of the water that's coming into the community. It's also designed with the natural grade of the land, so when the storm recedes, the water will recede back into the river more quickly.
The buildings will also have office and retail space, so many residents can stay put through a storm surge.
Domino is an interesting model to really think about how you build in the world that we're going to be living in the next 100 years or so in terms of flooding and sea level rise.
Developers and the city now work together to harden New York against the rising sea. This might prevent incidents such as the transformer explosion in Lower Manhattan during Sandy that left 200,000 people without power, heat, or light.
Our electric grid now has the benefit of an additional $1 billion of hardening that has been placed into the grid to make sure the lights stay on the next time. We're dealing with a very complex set of new projects. They've never been done before, first of its kind in such a dense urban environment. And we're moving them as quickly as we can. I'm hopeful about New York's future because of the ability that New Yorkers have shown to adapt to any number of challenges over its nearly 400-year history. We're going to be here, we're going to work with the threats, we're going to adapt, and this is going to be a thriving city.
Many will defend, but some will be forced to retreat. That is New York City's inevitable future.
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to whether we should build or not in the floodplain. There's hundreds of thousands of people in New York City that live in floodplains. And I think there are probably some cases where it just simply doesn't make sense, where it's not just a floodplain, it's a highly vulnerable floodplain. Retreat in that instance might make sense.
What this means for the future, it means seawall or levee protection, storm surge barriers, or the city could encourage more building and population on higher ground and do things to try to discourage or buy people out who are in these low-lying flooded areas.
There are some clear statistics out there that for every dollar we invest in risk reduction, that there's a $4 avoided future cost. Sandy was a $19 billion event in terms of damages and lost economic activity. From the risks of climate change, that same event in the 2050s could be a $90 billion event.
I think we have to prepare for the unexpected. And what that means is, how do you create a city that can recover from any number of tough things happening to it, whether it's a flood or a tornado or a terrorist attack. Cities are vulnerable. Cities have always been vulnerable. Cities also have this extraordinary way of being resilient and building back. And so, to me, it's always about the basics: mobility, power, water. Fixing this is not rocket science, right? It's simply a question of will.
Urban engineering will be the determining factor in just how New York faces its next great challenge. It's a transformation that has to happen if it is to survive and even thrive when the water comes.
We have the situation that about 1 million more people are expected to move to New York City by the year 2030. In addition, waterfront is still considered the most desirable real estate, which is a notion from the past that doesn't hold for the future.
If we're really going to adapt to climate change, it's about behavior change. It's about us all thinking about living with water differently and being willing to change and adapt over time.
This is our home, and we want to keep it our home, and we want it to be a home for our children and our grandchildren as well. So now's the time to start dealing with the problem.
And I think if we do that, this city, which is one of the greatest cities in the world, will continue to be for a long, long time.
Major funding for Sinking Cities is provided by Dr. P. Roy and Diana T. Vagelos, with additional funding from Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III. and the Mark Haas Foundation. Sinking Cities is also supported by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Very frightening moments unfolding in eastern Japan along the Kinagawa River.
Japan has been pounded with heavy rain for 2 days in a row. This is the 18th typhoon to hit Japan this year.
September 2015. 20 inches of rain pelts down on Joso City just outside Tokyo, Japan. The river that flows through the city can't contain this unprecedented rainfall. The river floods, and 65,000 people find themselves trapped in a watery nightmare. This, despite the fact that Tokyo has the most advanced flood prevention system in the world.
Japan is prone to so many different types of natural disasters, including the flooding and potential for mudslides that we are seeing right now.
But that system did not anticipate the changes this century brings. Rising sea levels and stronger, more frequent rainstorms than have ever been recorded.
Tokyo's defense line is constructed to endure a certain amount of rain. The reality is the embankment is not strong enough to withstand such force.
The world's great cities face threats they have never before encountered. New York, Tokyo, London, Miami. The threats come from the sea, from above, and from below. These are the problems and their solutions. For when the water comes.
More than 170,000 people received evacuation orders, and we know dozens of them were stranded in their homes. Even a man holding onto a light pole, waving for the Japanese military helicopters to come and rescue him.
From June to October, an average of 20 typhoons approach Japan each year. But the typhoon that hit Joso City in September 2015 was different. The area had seen stronger typhoons, but never before had the rain fallen so hard.
This is the Kinu River. In Chinese letters, the name is spelled as Angry Demon. My father-in-law was also here. He came with me because he was worried. And as soon as he said, "Watch out," the water came rushing in.
Hiromi Shinozaki and her father-in-law were among the people swept away in the sudden deluge. They clung to a floating piece of timber to avoid drowning. Torrential waters washed everything away in residential neighborhoods. Hiromi was one of dozens of stranded residents rescued by helicopters that day, as these people were.
Holding on to the timber, we hoped that as long as our faces were above the surface of the water, we would be okay. We held on as best we could, but we weren't able to keep a hold on it, so we had to swim for our lives.
They finally made it to shore where they were still trapped.
People were stuck and needed help everywhere. They were waving to helicopters, calling for help.
ヘリコプターを見つけたら手を振ってるよ、助けてっていうような状況だったんです。
They were hovering above us. One rescuer came down. But because of the fierce current, he got washed away. I tried to hold on in spite of the strong wind. It was really hard, but they finally pulled me up to safety.
Her father-in-law was also rescued. In fact, only 2 people died. 7,000 homes and buildings in Joso City were damaged or destroyed in that flood. Joso City was hit with 20 inches of rain in 24 hours. If that much rain had fallen on Tokyo, just 30 miles away, the results would have been even more catastrophic. Tokyo is the largest city in the world, with 38 million people in the greater Tokyo area. Without this vital city, Japan's economy would collapse, which is why protecting this city matters.
Tokyo is like the Rolls-Royce of city and engineering. It has most of the high-tech system that you can find in the world.
Dr. Christopher Gomez of Kobe University studies the threat Tokyo faces from the rising sea.
Tokyo is the economic engine of Japan, and Japan is one of the major engine of the world economy. So all of this is interconnected. If you start to have a major flood on Tokyo, we're all going to pay it. And very directly, actually.
Many insurance companies around the world, such as Lloyd's or Swiss Re, have assessed Tokyo as the most dangerous city in the world. And in their assessment, they say Tokyo's preparation for flooding is not enough. So the true risk to Tokyo lies in people believing that they are protected and safe, when they are not at all.
Understanding Tokyo begins with a picture of the city's relationship with the sea. It sits on the shore of Tokyo Bay, which connects to the Pacific Ocean. To the city's east is the Edo River, and its western border runs along the Tama River. In all, 107 rivers run through the city. Water is the heart and veins of Tokyo. Though some areas are below sea level, the city sits 130 feet above it on average, compared with New York at just over 30 feet, or Miami at 6 feet. Tokyo's higher ground suggests relative safety as oceans rise around the world. But the difference with Tokyo is the wide range of threats it faces, more than any other city on the planet. Earthquakes, tsunamis, a unique quicksand phenomenon called liquefaction, and above all, powerful rainstorms that come with typhoons. Typhoons pound Tokyo with rain from June to October every year. The city gets 60 inches of rain per year, 3 times the legendary rainfall of London. But this isn't new.
"32 inches of rain deluges heavily populated Kyushu, Japan's southernmost major island. Low-lying areas where citizen towns are concentrated were hardest hit. The record torrents brought the island's streams and rivers to overflow. A surging tide of destruction swept through the area near Nagasaki, leaving in its wake a sea of mud, debris, and death."
In the half-century since that 1954 deluge, the heavy precipitation from these storms has become 30% greater and more intense than ever before in the city's recorded history. In 2018, Typhoon Maria strikes Japan's southwest, bringing the country's worst flooding and mudslides in 35 years. Millions of people are displaced from their homes, throwing Japan into a state of emergency. Over 200 people are dead, and the damage is estimated in the billions of dollars, with roads, bridges, and railways destroyed. The people of Japan reel from the disaster, but fear worse is still to come from even more powerful typhoons.
The behavior of the typhoons around Japan in recent years shows that they are clearly different from the ones in the past.
Dr. Tomoya Shibayama has been studying typhoons and their rainfall for nearly 40 years.
Until recently, it was common for a typhoon to lose its intensity as it got closer to Japan because the sea surface temperature was colder. One of the recent changes is that typhoons continue to grow as they approach Japan because the sea surface temperature is warmer, so the typhoon does not lose its power.
Sea surface temperatures around Japan are expected to rise by almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. This means storms will increase in intensity as they approach the island nation.
Until now, we have been referring to the Issei Bay typhoon as our benchmark.
The Issei Bay typhoon is also known as Typhoon Vera. In 1959, it hit Japan with 20 inches of rain and a 13-foot storm surge. Some 5,000 people died, and Vera did over $2 billion of damage, Japan's deadliest and costliest typhoon.
But in the future, I think we need to be prepared for even bigger storm surges.
Flooding is a problem Tokyo has endured for 4 centuries. In the 20th century, after Typhoon Vera, the city found solutions through elaborate engineering. Water is diverted to rivers through a series of canals and pipes, which all flow back into the sea. And the city's main rivers are contained by levees, which have been built up over decades to prevent flooding in low-lying areas.
The limit of the Arakawa River's defense is rainfall of 20 inches in 3 days. The levees are built based on such a plan. So if the same kind of rain that fell on the Kinu River would fall on Tokyo, I have to say that the reality is the embankment is not strong enough to endure such force. Tokyo is defenseless against such rainfall. The moment the embankment breaks, a high wave, like a tsunami, would hit residential areas.
Stronger, wetter typhoons are just one of Tokyo's problems. Another is tsunamis triggered by earthquakes. Japan is situated on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a tectonic plate that is responsible for 90% of the world's earthquakes. Japan records more of them every year than any other country on Earth, 1,500 earthquakes. With sea levels rising, the aftershocks of tsunamis are deadlier than ever. In 2011, an earthquake triggered a tsunami, leading to a meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. The tsunami set off the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl, and it woke the world up to the constant danger Japan faces from the sea.
People realized that they had to recognize the destructive power of the water. If the river embankment in Tokyo breaks, residential areas would be hit by waves as large as the tsunami which destroyed Fukushima.
The 2011 earthquake did impact Tokyo, 150 miles away. Yoshitaka Udagawa owns an exotic fish shop in Urayasu, a city on Tokyo's outskirts.
I felt a massive jolt with a giant thud. We have many earthquakes in Japan, so I thought it's an earthquake again. But I had never experienced such an intense earthquake. It continued, boom, boom, boom.
Udagawa fled his store into the street and the earthquake's fury.
It was difficult to walk. The poles were really swaying in all directions. The ground was shaking. I continued walking and heard a noise when I got to this point. You see that dark part over there? There was something shooting out of it, like oil blowing out.
The water's gushing out everywhere. The ocean seems to be coming up.
The dark liquid gushing from the ground was not oil, but water and mud. A process called liquefaction was causing the groundwater to push up to the surface. About 10% of Tokyo is built on low-lying sediment along the city's coast. The shaking effect from the earthquakes creates a form of liquid earth, like quicksand. Liquefaction is now a regular side effect of earthquakes in Tokyo.
Under your feet, you have up to 125 meters of soft sediment mixed with water. The problem with it is that mixture between water and sediment. Each time you have a shake, the water gets expelled from the ground, so it leaves a hole in the ground in some ways, and then the ground goes down.
Shinji Sasa of the Port and Airport Research Institute created a shake table to demonstrate the process of liquefaction in the laboratory.
If I turn on the machine, the shaking occurs. Initially, the small shaking, just as real earthquake, and then larger earthquake motion occur, and the ground will undergo liquefaction gradually, and then it will affect the stability of structures resting on the ground. That means that houses and structures or buildings will start to sink deeply in the ground. Let's start. 3, 2, 1, okay.
So when you look at the map right here, you can see that all the blue areas here, this is already below sea level. We are -1, -2 meters below sea level. And Tokyo is not any other city. You have a major quake waiting for you, so all of that can actually go down by an extra meter. What you have to remember is that all the sediments below the city, a lot of them are a mixture of water and sand, and once all of this get excited, you get liquefaction, the water comes out, and what remains is the land going down.
Liquefaction is a new phenomenon in Tokyo. It too is linked to the rising sea levels.
The groundwater of Tokyo is connected to sea level, so if the sea level goes up, then the groundwater will also go up. It's like a pie chart. We have been dividing that pie. So those slices can be the river flood. Another one can be the liquefaction during an earthquake that brings the land down. Another one can be the storm surge. Another one will be, again, the sea level rise. And all of those elements that are looked on separately will at some point happen together.
Tokyo has one last unique problem. Entire neighborhoods are slowly sinking below sea level. Decades of pumping groundwater for domestic use has left massive cavities below the city's foundations, and some areas are now sinking.
300 years ago, Tokyo was just a village, just a few people, called Edo actually. And during the 19th century, this village became the capital. So on top of a marshland, on top of silty sediment mixed with water, they started to drain this land and built this huge capital. But it means that underneath the ground, you still have the mud flats. What you have below your feet is a mixture of water and sediment. Until 1960s, people used to drink water from the groundwater, meaning that they pumped the water out of the ground. So where the water was, then just a void remains. So the land sinks slowly.
30% of Tokyo's population now lives below sea level, and some homes have sunk as much as 15 feet due to subsidence, the caving in of land. As sea levels rise, the gap between these low-lying neighborhoods and the waters above them becomes ever more dangerous.
海面上昇が、地盤沈下と
The sea level rise is now producing the same effect as the ground subsidence. The danger is getting greater and greater.
再び地盤沈下が始まっていると言ってもいい状況が今生まれつつあるわけです。
You have a city which is just at the zero level. So any increase in sea level is already a problem. So this map here is the map of Tokyo. So what you can see in white here is the bay where the water is, and everything else is supposed to be land. But if you look at it, you can see that all the blue areas here, and they are blue for a good reason, it's because it's already below the sea level. If you add 50 centimeters of sea level, you can see that a large part of the city already, in red here, is under the water. And then if you add 75 centimeters and 1 meter, you almost have 100 square kilometers of water covering your land.
If the sea rises by 3 feet, 60 square miles of Tokyo will be submerged. Japan's problems are compounded by an economic challenge. Its population is expected to shrink by a third in the next half-century. In the past, a growing population and a booming economy helped pay for mega-projects to prevent and combat natural disasters. Those days are ending. 40% of Japan's population is projected to be over age 64 by 2050. The country's birth rate is plummeting, and it isn't expected to rebound to present levels for another 45 years.
So Japan has been very good at facing its issues so far. They've been working very hard on all of this. You have a lot of engineered systems that are top-notch. But in a country where the population is increasingly aging, and where money is going to be scarcer and scarcer, how do you maintain all those systems? The population which is aging plus the climate change is a real ticking bomb for Tokyo. How do you build new dikes and new levees when you don't have the fund for it? So it's a real challenge.
Kamaishi is 350 miles up the coast from Tokyo. It's an extreme example of Japan's plummeting population. Less than 40,000 people live here, 25,000 fewer than in 1980. The city is home to the largest seawall in the world.
The north wall was 3,200 feet. The southern wall was 2,200 feet. And the part where the ships go through was 1,000 feet long. So as a whole, it was 6,500 feet, over a mile long. Kamaishi's breakwater is constructed at a depth of 200 feet below the surface. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records.
The breakwater cost $1.6 billion and took 3 decades to complete. In 2009, the job was finally done. Just 2 years later, Japan's tsunami crushed this marvel of engineering like a toy and swept through the town. The bodies of about 1,000 people were never found. Akiko Iwasaki runs a hotel outside Kamaishi. She witnessed the horrific 32-foot-high tidal flood that destroyed her city. She was also personally struck by tragedy. One of her relatives was among those killed.
One of my family members tied herself to a pillar at the entrance of her house with a rope. She was a senior, and when the firefighters urged residents to evacuate, she probably didn't think the tsunami would come up that high. She didn't run away. When she was found, her son said that in the time she took to tie herself to the pillar, she could have run to safety.
Sadness turned to outrage. How could this expensive mega project that was built to protect the city fail so catastrophically? The seawall is now being rebuilt. And how to make it certain not to fail again is Yusai Ito's job.
Since we're in the midst of construction, we see some different heights. However, they will be covered with concrete and they will all be level. The tsunami came from offshore, crossed the mouth of the bay breakwater, and moved into the city. It was about 33 feet high.
The seawall had been designed to withstand a wave of that height. The engineers who designed the seawall were determined to figure out why and how it failed with such loss of life.
Before the tsunami in northeastern Japan, we didn't understand exactly how barriers were destroyed.
In his hydraulics lab at Waseda University, Dr. Tomoya Shibayama is trying to solve the mystery.
This is the simulator for the waves caused by the tsunami or the storm charge. From the back of this waterway, the storm charge comes this way. This structure here simulates the breakwaters. The waves go beyond the breakwater and reach the towns near Tokyo. We observe how the water behaves in this area using this hydraulic simulator.
Using the simulator to recreate a storm surge, Shibayama and his research assistants recorded on a high-speed camera. A colored dye allows them to see the water's behavior in detail.
3, 2, 1, go.
Once the experiment is complete, Shibayama can look at the data collected by cameras and sensors to determine the water's motion after it hits the barrier. He concludes that the storm surge washed over the wall, putting weight on the top, and then dealt a vicious backwards blow to the support structures underneath.
It gets really fast here. We must check the velocity field and pressure field.
Once it gets past the breakwater, powerful vortices push and pull at the concrete in all directions with a force the wall's designers did not anticipate. Still, some experts believe that even Japan's most advanced engineering is no match for the increasing power of the sea.
The hard solutions that people talk about, various gates, levees, walls, and so forth, I'm not sure it's practical because sometimes it's just not clear to me that the science is there that says it's really going to do the job it's meant to do.
Vishaan Chakrabarty is a New York architect specializing in storm resilience.
It's a basic Albert Einstein thing. Matter doesn't just disappear. The water doesn't magically go away when you build a wall. It gets redirected to someone else's doorstep. And I think that's a fundamental issue that, again, I can't solve as an architect. I think most people who deal with this can't really solve it.
No wall is fail-safe. So I think it does tend to encourage people to live behind the wall in a way that's not resourceful, in a way that trusts the wall to never fail. And that's not good.
Urban designer Christina Hill warns against what in her specialty are called hard solutions. The water always wins.
When you build a wall, you size the foundation for the height of the wall. If you can't just add more bricks to the top and have it be structurally sound. So future generations, if that's not big enough, have to actually replace it.
Dr. Shibayama also knows no seawall is invincible. The revised plan is not to build higher or even stronger. Rather than try to deflect the storm surge, the new breakwater is designed to absorb its energy, and in extreme cases, allow water to flow over top without ripping it apart.
The role of such hard structures as breakwaters and tsunami storm surge walls isn't a complete defense. Rather, as with the case of Kamaishi, they delay the storm's impact by reducing its energy. What we need to change moving forward is that we are in the era in which each one of us must think about how we are going to survive and how we are going to protect our families, even if water goes over hard structures.
typhoons, tsunamis, earthquakes, rising seas, liquefaction, sinking neighborhoods. Tokyo, the world's most populous city, has the world's largest set of problems.
So when you pile up all of those elements together, so the sea level will rise 1 meter, plus the quake, that's 2 meters, plus eventually a typhoon that can bring the water level a meter higher, so that's 3 meters. And if you are unlucky, at that time you have flood from the rivers, or you have a small tsunami that are predicted to be between 1 and 1.5 meter. All piling those elements together, well, you're in deep trouble. It's not a question of is it going to happen, it's a question of when it is going to happen.
Nonetheless, Tokyo may be one of the very few cities in the world seriously grappling with the challenge of climate change. It's figured out engineering solutions before, and with sea levels rising, Japan now needs to do it again. In 1993, before climate change was much discussed, Tokyo decided to tackle its existing flood problem with a mega project that many believe was decades ahead of its time. Japan built a futuristic cavern to protect itself against water from above, below, or from the surrounding sea.
We are in the surge tank. We have come down to 65 feet below the ground. On the left-hand side is shaft number 1. Further down the tunnel, we also have shaft number 2, 3, 4, and 5. The overflow from flooding is collected through these shafts and goes through the tunnel to come up through shaft number 1 gradually. The water then flows into the Showa drainage pump station through this surge tank.
When water floods Tokyo, this is where it all goes.
The accumulated water will rise, and eventually it will reach a certain level. Then it gets forced through the 4 pumps of the Showa drainage pump system to be drained out to the Edo River. We have the water flowing into our facility about 7 times a year on average. Out of those 7 times, for about 60% of the time, the water flows into here and is forced out to the Edo River. For the remaining 40% of the time, we store the water here as it can hold up to 670,000 tons. And then the water gets returned to the river it came from.
The system can hold up to 65 million gallons of water and can pump it out as quickly as it comes in. Lewis McKenna is a UK-based engineer focused on the problem of stormwater management.
For the mind's eye to capture the scale and size of these silos, you can take the Statue of Liberty and place it inside one of those silos. That's how big it is. It's quite impressive. Flooding in Tokyo is a big challenge. If they didn't have that type of protection, they will be gone.
It took 13 years to construct this facility from 1993 to 2006. In actual figures, it cost 230 billion yen.
That's more than $2 billion.
Some domestic and international evaluations consider this to be expensive. However, the flood damages in this region have been reduced to approximately 1/10. Therefore, I think it is not that expensive when you take the flood damages into consideration.
In 2015, after a record rainfall, this temple to engineering was filled to the brim. But the heaviest of those rains missed Tokyo, with the greater impact outside the city to the northeast. Kuniharu says the giant Showa drainage pump system could not have coped if that storm had directly hit Tokyo.
I heard it was the greatest amount of inflow and drainage since this facility began its operation. Our facility has 4 pumps, and we usually use 1 or 2 at a time. 2015 was the first time all 4 pumps operated at full capacity simultaneously for more than a week to drain the water in an effort to mitigate flooding in the region.
Once the tank is full, it drains into the Edo River at a rate of 53,000 gallons, the capacity of an Olympic-sized swimming pool, every 12 seconds. It's the most advanced flood mitigation system on the planet. But recent record rainfalls are too much for even the massive reservoirs to handle.
We do get questioned about what happens if we had a rainfall of a similar scale. And we must admit that we are not fully certain. To build a facility in the first place, there is an expected amount of water that will flow into it. This facility was designed to cope with that amount. But if there is a rainfall or water flow that is above this upper limit, we will not be able to take it in nor drain it out. It is unavoidable that the local communities will pay the price in such a case.
With increased rainfall and rising seas, engineers like Dr. McKenna believe the facility is no longer 100% effective.
Even with this amazing superstructure, they still recognize that because of climate change, because of the rise in sea level, and because of the potential using scenario modeling and looking at the worst case scenario of what potentially could be the worst case type of tidal surge, in addition to maybe a typhoon event, they recognize this protection that is currently in place will not be fit for purpose. That will be something for them to discuss and feature in their future planning for Tokyo, but it will need to be put in place, or else Tokyo will be submerged by flooding.
こちらは目黒川水門です。こちらは目黒川水門です。ただいまより水門の定期運転を行います。
Tokyo is protected by a series of 44 floodgates along the city's many rivers. They are designed to stop storm surges as high as 26 feet. The highest ever recorded in Tokyo is only 10 feet.
In the event of tsunamis or storm surges, we are supposed to close the gate when the water reaches a certain level.
Even with sea level rise, the floodgates offer substantial protection to over a quarter of Tokyo.
You see that there are seawalls all around the gate, and the walls look high, but inside the walls, it's actually fairly low. So if we don't close the gate, the area inside the walls would be submerged.
If the water overflows the riverbanks, pumping stations are activated.
こちらポンプなんですけれども、When the water level on the inner side of a closed water gate rises with rain, you use this pump to move the water accumulated inside the gate to the other side of the gate.
吐き出すという、そういう目的のポンプです。
The next line of defense is what's called super levees, which are currently being built all around Tokyo. Dr. Christina Hill believes the levees are Japan's best long-term solution against the rising sea.
What they did was they piled up all this earthquake-safe material, so that means carefully sorted gravels and sands, and then they extended everybody's property lines up into the air through that new material, and gave the original property owners rights to redevelop buildings on top that now have water views in some cases. So I think it's a fantastic idea. Even if the dike is overtopped, if water comes over the top, they've built terraces on the backside that would slow that water down as it moved towards highly populated areas of Tokyo. It's so important to slow flooding down.
Nobuyuki Tsuchiya is lead engineer on the Super Levee project.
With the ground subsidence, we had to reinforce the levees by adding height. That's why this one looks a bit steep. When it was originally made, it was more gradual. Because we added the height, it's a bit unbalanced. Because it's such a serious problem, we've been working on this Super Levee project, which would make this residential ground as high as the levees and defend the community from water.
The super levees were planned to run for 540 miles along 6 rivers to a height of 30 feet. But that plan was so expensive, it was scaled down to protect only the most vulnerable, low-lying areas. Still, it comes at a cost to Tokyo's landscape, and for residents who have to leave their homes as their entire neighborhoods are elevated.
And then we fill the land and raise the ground level. Then we build roads, parks, and rebuild the town from scratch. Then the residents can come back.
The people of Tokyo have come to realize that they have few good options. It's either evacuate for a short time for rebuilding or abandon their homes for good.
It's going to be challenging, but if this levee breaks, it's not only these houses that get destroyed, but also the water would overrun the whole Tokyo area. If you think about that, then asking for some cooperation and time from the residents here would make the most sense for the safety of Tokyo.
Tokyo has to seek a whole array of solutions and keep re-engineering itself for a future of rising seas.
So the coastal defenses in Tokyo are some of the best in the world by a long range. And Tokyo City has been rising up their defenses to meet those challenges. Does it mean that it's going to be enough for the future challenges? That's another question.
The city may have to consider ideas from outside of Japan. Kunle Adeyemi is an architect whose focus is on building near and even on water. Faced with climate change, he believes humanity has to adapt its thinking before it's too late.
I am a realistic optimist. And what I mean by that is that I'm realistic in the sense that, you know, I go to Tokyo and I see the impact of sea level rise, climate change, or simply water. I just see places that used to be land are now covered by water. That is the real fact. I don't want to see that as a problem. I want to see that as an opportunity. And how do I deal with this opportunity where I have to learn to live with water as opposed to fighting it? And that's what I see. We're producing infrastructure for water culture.
Adeyemi has proposed an experimental design for temporary, low-cost floating habitats that can be used for housing, office space, or schools.
Well, so the idea is that we're trying to create a building system where the components are easy to fabricate in any kind of local region and assemble. No matter where you are in the world, you can find a particular class of timber that will be suitable for the production of the structure.
Adeyemi's design has been considered for several cities, including Tokyo. It can be easily adapted to Tokyo's unique environment. Temperatures rarely drop below freezing, and the structure can be made to ride out heavy rains and waves.
We've used 2 systems so far. The first being just very basic recycled plastic barrels that are used in industrial areas. And second has been the expanded polystyrene, which is used in construction. We know there are different technologies for creating flotation devices that would enable this to work in different parts of the world.
Engineer Toshio Nakajima has an even more ambitious idea. He's proposed an entire floating city in Tokyo Bay.
The concept of this floating city is to make the lowest land as safe as possible. So we dig it out to make the low land even lower, and then we flood it. After putting the water in, we build the floating foundation, and we live on it, so that when it rains and the water level goes up, the city itself is raised with the water and protects itself from water disasters.
Nakajima based his design on the Megafloat, a floating airplane runway in Tokyo Bay that has proven to be very effective. Nakajima's city would use the same technology, basically a gigantic modular floating dock.
This water is taken from the Arakawa River, and the water goes through the city and goes out into the sea. So the city controls the water. The energy we need to move the water through the city is generated in this area here by using the solar panels. We would have a big tank underwater, located below the city, to store rainwater too. We won't need anything difficult technology-wise. If we're serious about it, we can build it anytime.
Nakajima's floating city would look something like this video simulation. It would be able to withstand sea level rise, storm surges, and extreme rainfall. But Tokyo's cash-strapped government has not approved the plan so far.
I think it's not only Tokyo, but in all of Japan, people want to keep their conventional ways. I have the impression that many people are conservative and not open to new ideas.
Tokyo has to survive the rising waters. The future of Japan depends on it. Yet that may mean reshaping the city by retreating from the areas in the greatest danger.
One of the cheapest solutions and one of the easiest solutions, at least on paper, might be the retreat from the most floodable areas of Tokyo.
By the end of the century, Tokyo's world-famous Shibuya district could be one place to be abandoned to the waters.
We are going to see the population shrinking, so less people in the city. And that's maybe a chance to remodel the city in which we live. How can we concentrate people in safe areas and abandon slowly and naturally areas that are too dangerous to live in?
I think the question is not just about whether we retreat or we stand our ground, because that sets this opposition between humanity and the environment. It's a reconsideration of how to ensure that there's coexistence. So there needs to be a balance, and I think we've always created walls between us and the environment, and now we need to let go of the walls and find new ways of bridging the gap.
Some believe solutions may be rediscovered from history. Resiliency is now a buzzword of climate change engineering and design, but it perfectly describes what the people of Tokyo have been doing for centuries.
Our ancestors made the city here on a low, flat land, good for agriculture, and developed the city. People learned to live with the water when there was flooding. It's like a city in the water. In order to live there, people made their residence higher. We call it constructing a mizuya or mizuka, a shelter from the flood. But when you go to work, you go on a boat. When the water recedes, you just hang your boat under the floor of your house. So people live flexibly with the water. It was not about fighting the risk, but predicting it, accepting it, and living with it.
Tokyo is facing a huge amount of challenges, but people are still here rising to those challenges. And the way they look at it, human beings are part of nature. part of the environment. Those hazards and disasters are also part of the environment we live in, and we have to be able to live with it.
Those who lived through the most recent disasters to strike Tokyo are still adapting to their changing world. But they know they face challenges previous generations never did.
It's over there. This is the manhole that popped out of the ground. It's left as a monument. This is it. It got pushed up out of the ground. It reminds me that this happened. And it makes me think that we don't want something like this again. My view now is that this is a place to pray for no more disasters.
Despite his prayers, sea levels continue to rise. Typhoons grow stronger, and it rains more than ever.
Yes, I'm worried so much that I can't sleep. That's why at this moment too, we're trying to defend the city as much as possible against the water. We're building super levees, strengthening seawalls, improving pumping stations, and so on.
Human beings need to see danger. They need to know the world they live in order to become more resourceful over time. We have a long haul here with climate change. It's not going to be over in 50 years. We need multiple generations to become courageous and resourceful and smart with their money and technology and care about each other.
With today's level of funding, today's engineering, there is no clear answer on how to engineer our way out of this problem. But we're thinking about 50 years, 100 years time from now. And the engineering systems are going to progress as well. Nobody can tell what kind of solution we're going to be able to create or build in 100 years.
I would definitely say it is the Godzilla of all problems. And I believe a lot of the problems we're facing from climate change will require engineering-led solutions. And whether an engineer can take on Godzilla is what we're trying to find out.
It scares the bejesus out of me. You know, living near the water, I think, is something that is so core to the human spirit. And even people who don't live near the oceans, they go to lakes, they go to rivers. I think this is just, we come from water as a species. And so to me, it's just so tragic, the idea that we now have to think of water as an enemy. What we have right now is we have a toolkit that can help us make things better in the short term. That's only going to buy us some time as we figure out this problem at a global level, but it's at the global level that it has to be figured out.
Engineers, planners, and civic leaders in Tokyo are addressing their epic challenge with technology, engineering, and imagination, seeking solutions to protect the city for decades to come.
Tokyo is trying to keep the water away because it's being conventional. They're trying to fight against the water. But we can't keep doing that because the water is something more powerful than us. There's no way we would win.
The more we learn to evolve and adapt to what seems to be, at least in the next 50, 100 years, the path, the better we are in creating more livable environments. And I think the human species is an incredibly intelligent species, and Tokyo will learn to live with water.
Even though we've been trying our best, I don't think we can say that we're fully prepared for disasters.
Major funding for Sinking Cities is provided by Dr. P. Roy and Diana T. Vagelos, with additional funding from Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, and the Mark Haas Foundation. Sinking Cities is also supported by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Water is hitting London from all sides. What's happening has as much to do with urbanization as climate change.
Helicopters, too, have played their part, flying in supplies for the survivors and helping to maintain essential services in areas not yet evacuated.
People went to bed that night with no idea they were going to flood. Some people, unfortunately, didn't wake up the next day.
It will happen again. It's just a matter of when.
The storm that was London's wake-up call hit the city with a massive blow in January 1953. The destruction was immense.
59 people lost their lives on Canby Island in that terrible, terrible evening.
160,000 acres of land were inundated across the UK, and the city decided to act. But it would take $2 billion and nearly 30 years to create the crown jewel of their new system, the Thames Barrier. Climate change is now seen clearly as a present and future threat. With their prized barrier working far more often than it was intended to, London's future against the rising Thames is once again uncertain. Summer 2016, Canning Town, East London.
I was sitting here, just working away, and it was raining, so I went outside and opened the door, had a look, and thought, my God, this is tropical. It was a lot of rain. You know, you just don't see that kind of rain here in London. And the water just started coming in. It was crazy. In over 2 hours, there was almost a metre of water in here. Sewage everywhere. Drum kits were floating about in the water. Ants was just under the water. Things that survived were things that are on tables. The roads were impassable because the roads flooded. The trains couldn't run because it was basically a stream. The amount of water that was falling filled all the sewers, and the water's going to find its lowest point. I'm below ground level here. At the end of the day, how can you cope?
The world's great cities face threats they have never before encountered. New York, Tokyo, London, Miami. The threats come from the sea, from above, and from below. These are the problems and their solutions. For when the water comes.
So underneath here is the pump chamber with the pumps. I know for a fact it's going to happen again. It will happen again. It's just a matter of when. Rebuilding it took a good 10 months. God forbid it should happen like that again. For some reason, the pumps don't work. If it happened again, I'd just pack up.
Flash flooding has become commonplace in London. In 2007, one incident left 1,400 properties in the city flooded.
There's so much regeneration going on in London at the moment, where any kind of open space has been built on. So where does all that rain water go? It's not being soaked into the ground anymore.
London faces 3 challenges. Summertime rainfall in the UK has increased 20% in the past decade. The city is densely developed along the Thames River floodplain, meaning all that rain has no place to go. And the legendary Thames is handling more water than ever as sea levels rise all around the island nation. The Thames has always been at the heart of London's prosperity, linking the city to the outside world. But it has also posed a threat.
London probably has one of the longest flood histories of anywhere in the world. There's records of events going back thousands of years. I mean, there's hundreds of major storms that have occurred that have killed Several thousands of people.
London has a population of 8 million people, and the initial system was designed for 4 million people, so it's actually doubled over the course of, you could say, 125 years. If London stops functioning and London is flooded, this country, as far as you know it, will stop functioning.
While the Thames is widely thought of as London's river, it's actually part of a 215-mile-long series of tributaries and wetlands throughout southeastern England. The Thames flows east from Greater London into the North Sea, 50 miles away. Robert Muir Wood is a resiliency scientist in the private sector.
So what we're looking at here is a map of the Greater London area, and at the western end here we have the river which comes in from the countryside to the west of London, comes in, and the river is getting wider now. You can see it's also getting a bit muddier because the tides are very strong. They're carrying a lot of mud with them. Swings around here, passes into the Westminster area, so the centre of government, quite close to Hyde Park. Up here we get to the City of London, the old centre, which is actually on a slight hill, so it's actually protected from flood risk. In the aftermath of every flood or near-miss flood, the walls in central London, which protect central London from the river, have been raised.
As oceans rise, the Thames is affected because its estuary flows into the North Sea, and that poses further challenges for London.
The North Sea has been described as the perfect storm surge basin. It's very shallow. The shallower it is, the more effect that wind can have on raising up sea levels, but the North Sea also funnels as well.
When wind and storms make the waters of the North Sea rise, they funnel west into the Thames estuary and up the river to London.
And that wall of water has only one place to go. And we know what's at the end of this big corridor. London.
These storm surges have flooded London throughout history.
1928, in the middle of the night, there was high flow on the Thames coming into London on the river, and also there was a storm surge came in from the North Sea. In fact, the term storm surge was coined in the aftermath of what happened because people didn't have a word at the time to describe what kind of flood this was. But it actually flooded the areas of central London, of Westminster in particular, drowned, I think, 14 people, caused several thousand to lose their homes.
The storm that was London's wake-up call hit the city with a massive blow in January 1953.
People went to bed that night with no idea they were going to flood. Some people, unfortunately, didn't wake up the next day.
The storm began with high winds over the North Sea, battering its shores from Scotland to the Netherlands. Combining with the rising spring tide, a mammoth surge powered up the Thames.
The country was different in those times. There wasn't any warning system, there weren't really any defences per se.
At the mouth of the Thames, the people of Canvey Island had no idea what was coming. Only 11 years old at the time, Ray Howard remembers being woken in the middle of the night.
We were upstairs tucked in bed when all of a sudden my sister came into the bedroom and said, "Quick, there's water gushing down the street."
Hundreds of millions of gallons of water swept through the town.
People were clinging to their roofs and just hanging on because of the force of the breach and the force of the tide and the height of the tide.
The storm tide reached London around midnight. As water rose higher in the Thames, the BBC issued a warning, and cars equipped with loudspeakers were dispatched to rouse the sleeping city. The east end of the city was flooded from the Royal Docks into Canning Town. At London Bridge, the water reached its highest level ever recorded, threatening to breach the embankment and inundate central London.
In fact, in the centre of London, the river was actually brimful. It was a major event.
Then the wind turned unexpectedly and the surge receded. The centre of London was spared, but still the destruction was immense.
Helicopters, too, have played their part, flying in supplies for the survivors and helping to maintain essential services in areas not yet evacuated.
Poor people just had no chance. 59 people lost their lives on Canvey Island in that terrible, terrible evening, but 309 people along the whole east coast of the UK.
160,000 acres of land were inundated across the UK. The damage was the equivalent of nearly $2 billion today. But it could have been even worse for London. And the city decided to act.
That was the foundation as to why London should be protected. The flood was quite severe, and they realized that if we carry on in this fashion in the future, we won't be able to protect ourselves from this ongoing problem of a tidal surge leading to the riverbanks overtopping and actually flooding the floodplain all the way down to central London.
The options considered were, do we do nothing? Do we move London because the risk is too great? Or the third, do you build a barrier?
London set about bolstering its flood defenses with nearly 200 miles of embankments, gates, and barriers along the Thames and its tributaries. But it would take $2 billion and nearly 30 years to create the crown jewel of their new system. The Thames Barrier. A 600-yard-long floodgate that runs from New Charlton to Silvertown across the Thames was finished in 1982.
Tower Bridge, the last major bridge, and then the river still getting wider, swings around again past the old docks, going south and then north again in a big meander. This is where Canary Wharf, big new high-rise financial center is. Further towards the east, the river's getting still wider. We're heading more out to sea. And then finally we come to the line of the Thames Barrier itself. So everywhere to the west of that is actually protected by the Thames Barrier from storm surges coming in from the sea.
Normally, the barrier remains open so boat traffic can reach the Port of London. But when a storm surge approaches from the North Sea, 10 curved steel gates rotate up from the riverbed. This forms a solid wall against millions of tons of water that would inundate London. Since its installation, it's been used 182 times. And London has not been flooded once. Andy Batchelor has been the manager of this marvel of flood engineering for nearly 20 years.
The barrier is referred to as a sleeping giant because if we do our job well, no one needs to know because London's protected, so the tides can come and go, the barrier close, and they don't get their feet wet. That is the art of good flood risk management.
For 3 decades, the barrier has kept the city safe from storm surges.
The Thames Barrier has been designed for a 1 in a 1,000 year event. What that means is that there's a 0.1% chance of London being flooded as a result of that barrier. That is why it works.
But while it's been doing its job of keeping London dry, the climate has been changing. So now the Thames Barrier faces a new challenge.
The barrier was designed in the 60s. Climate change, global warming weren't phrases in the dictionary then.
The designers of the barrier had planned for higher sea levels, not because of rising seas, but because southeast England is literally sinking at a rate of 1.5 millimeters, or a 1/16 of an inch, per year.
The designers and engineers who crafted the barrier made their best estimation and calculations to factor in sea level rise in the future. Not thinking of it in the context of climate change or adaptation, but recognizing that the geological formation underneath the southeast in London is sinking. Their appreciation of geology more than the appreciation of climate change is what led them to put in effect an 8 millimeter factor of safety every year into the design of the Thames Barrier. If you have a rising sea level, in addition to a landmass that is sinking, that's a quite interesting combination.
Climate change is now seen clearly as a present and future threat. In London, a dramatic 2013 weather event exposed vulnerability in the celebrated Thames Barrier system. On December 5, 2013, Cyclone Zephyr smashed into Britain's east coast, churning up the North Sea higher than in decades.
In the northern parts of the UK, the 5th and 6th of December actually had higher sea levels than in 1953.
The storm surge rushed up the Thames. The barrier held strong and did its usual job.
And that really was the most significant event we've had since 1953. So that was a good test of the sort of protective capabilities of the barrier.
But in that storm, something new happened. Torrential rain filled the length of the Thames with an unprecedented volume of water.
The rainfall flow just didn't stop for 3 months.
We had storm after storm tracking across the Atlantic, dumping hundreds of millimeters of rain on the UK. So large regions experienced levels of rainfall that we've not got in the observational record.
The UK had more rain that winter than in any year since records began in 1910. And all that rain had to go somewhere.
The River Thames is big, one of the UK's biggest rivers. It's a catchment, we call it. Any rain that's falling around that area always goes down into the River Thames.
By January, England was seeing a new kind of flooding called fluvial. The Thames was flooding, not draining the land. Now the barrier is put into action in a way its designers never intended. Not to keep storm surge out of the Thames, but to use the river above the barrier as a reservoir for excess rain. At low tide, the barrier is closed, leaving the Thames nearly empty to take on flooding from heavy rainfall upstream.
We've got two factors, rainfall going one way, tide going the other. And what we're able to do is close the barrier and stop the surge tide from going into London. If we close the Thames barrier very shortly after low water, what we end up in the centre of London is like an empty reservoir. So the rainfall is able to come in and not cause any problems, and the barrier's shut, and with all the other defences being closed as well, they're able to contain that surge tide and thereby stop from going into London and therefore also not overflow. So we've done a double act of the reservoirs contain the rainfall and the defences and the barriers contain the surge. So it's that act of looking after both sides, shall we say.
Without the barrier's use, central London would have suffered catastrophic flooding. And there was a limit to how far the barrier did work that winter. In places like Sunbury on the Thames just south of Heathrow Airport, the water had no outlet, so it overflowed its banks.
We watch it coming up, creeping up the bank slowly and steadily. And once it breaks this bank, you know it goes very fast, because once it's over this brow, it starts to take the part very quickly. And then you know you're going to be watching it for quite a few days.
In a matter of days, the Kirbys' home is underwater. Tina, her husband Adrian, and daughters Sujata and Sajaza decide to stand their ground as the waters rise right to their front door.
3 weeks to a month, it was here. It was around the house. We would have to wear waders to leave the house.
Use a boat.
Then we started using a boat to leave the house.
It's creating a lot of mess and not going anywhere.
We would take the children out in the boat, you know, and sail them down the road. You would try and make fun where you could.
Because if you didn't have a laugh, then you'd probably cry. But it was better to be at home than to find yourself alternative accommodation.
After nearly a month, the Kirbys thought they had won the battle.
Towards the end of January, it started to recede. And so we thought, okay, the worst of it's over and things will be better. It then started to rain again, really heavily. The second time it came a lot faster.
Now, the water came higher and higher into the house.
Probably was about that high?
Yeah, I'd say about 9 inches.
9 inches, sort of that sort of thing. So it cleared the skirting and was into the plaster.
For more than a month, the Kirbys lived with water 9 inches deep in their house.
And we thought it will be one night, it'll go away and we'll dry it out, we'll get dryers and it'll be fine. But, you know, wearing Wellington boots in your house, you put them down and they float away the minute you put them down. So every time you took your shoe off to go up the stairs, you had to make sure you held on to it, otherwise it would be gone and you'd be left standing there with nothing.
That is the moment that you evacuate, when you get a cold Wellington boot. There's no way of drying it. It's so cold. That's when you go.
Across southwest London, families were flooded out of their homes. In total, over 10,000 properties in the UK were flooded that winter. Even in central London, which escaped flooding, the defense systems were stretched to their limits.
It was absolutely unprecedented in that we actually had 50 closures of the Thames Barrier. 41 of those were as a consequence of the rainfall, with the remaining 9 as a consequence of the tides. Now, to put that into context, the normal operation is of the order of about 1 to 2 per year. So at that time, we'd only closed about 160 times in 30 years. So we saw a third of our closures, roughly, in 3 months by comparison to 30 years.
With their prized barrier working far more often than it was intended to, London's future against the rising Thames is once again uncertain.
The flood barriers have made a difference, both the permanent ones and the temporary ones, but it's clear in some cases they've been overtopped, they've been overrun, and so of course we should look again about whether there's more we can do.
London's been here for many centuries. Currently we have a population of 8 million. By 2100 that could almost double. And yet everybody wants to live in the centre. So we're building taller, we're densifying, and we're building more subways, more tube systems, and we're going down. So when the rain falls, where does it go? So we need space for water, we need space for it to soak, to be able to be stored.
With heavier and more frequent rainfall, there is nowhere for all the water to go. What's happening has as much to do with urbanization as climate change. Governments and public utilities are searching for solutions, large and small.
Things like gardens and parks have been paved over for a variety of reasons. There's more runoff and it's more likely to cause flooding than perhaps a generation ago when there was just more greenery around to soak it up.
15% of Greater London is considered to be the floodplain, most of it in the low-lying areas alongside the Thames, where approximately 1.5 million people live, and more are still coming. About 75% of this massive urban area is completely paved over. With so much of the absorbent green space covered with asphalt and concrete, the runoff is directed into sewers and drains, which can't handle that excess water.
It's running off into very old sewers. They were built back in the Victorian times for a whole different population, but they're too small. It's simple. I think we have been put to the test. I know that this area is a floodplain, for instance. They're still building many flats. You know, people need accommodation. I don't know what they're doing when it comes to the flood risk. The Thames Barrier is not that far away from here. I have this place because it's affordable. At the end of the day, it is in a floodplain, and I know it's in a floodplain. What do you do?
London needs new solutions against the increase in rain. The first challenge is better prediction of future rainstorms like those of 2013-2014.
When 1314 came along and we had such unprecedented levels of rainfall, then the immediate question arises, where did it come from?
Professor Adam Scaife is the head of long-range prediction at the Met Office, the UK's National Weather Service. He says climate scientists have long known that global warming will lead to increased rainfall.
something called the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. It's a really simple equation. People study it at school. Tells you that the warmer the air, the more moisture it will hold, and therefore when that moisture comes out, which it must do somewhere, then you will have heavier, more frequent downpours and more mean rainfall. So that's really clear. We know that. The big question is where? Where is the rainfall going to come out? And that, of course, is much more difficult.
Traditional weather prediction tools like satellites provide part of the picture, but long-term forecasting has to account for additional factors.
You better take into account the increasing CO2 because the temperature is going to be that much different. However, if you want to forecast very long range, beyond, say, a week, the ocean starts to play a really big role. And so we have something called Argo floats. There are thousands of these things all over the globe. It's an international project. We put them all together, collect all the data, and that tells us what the temperature and salinity of the ocean is throughout its depth worldwide. The ocean is a bit like a pacemaker for the atmosphere. The atmosphere is jumping around with its weather storms and things, but the slow guiding force of the ocean can steer that chaotic variability one way or another.
All of that data is compiled onto one of the biggest supercomputers in the country.
It allows us to split the globe into tinier and tinier pixels. And the more pixels we have and the more layers we represent the ocean and the atmosphere over, then the more accurate we can get the forecast.
That allows SCAPE to narrow down how the rainfall will affect this specific area. What the computer's results show is bad news for London.
We are very confident that in winter, we're going to see more rainfall, more heavy rainfall and more average rainfall, and hence more flooding. There is every single winter between 5 and 10% chance of a new record. Then after a few decades, what is now an unprecedented event will become the norm.
The Thames Barrier was designed to be used just a few times a year. If it's needed 50 or more times, as it was in the winter of 2013, it will wear out. That is a mechanical certainty.
You know, similar to your car, if you're always driving your car, you're never going to be able to put it in the garage to maintain it. So there's got to be an optimum figure, and notionally, just for now, we've put that as 50. So we're working towards when we hit that maximum of 50 per year, we would need to have a new barrier.
And that's without factoring in the next big problem: sea level rise. London has to plan for how much sea level will rise by the end of the century. One estimate predicts that could be from 10 to 35 inches.
Based on the acceleration rates we're seeing at the moment, we think it's going to be at least 50 centimetres, if not higher, but we're expecting with an acceleration in ice melt that will gradually increase. So for London, the maximum we think it could be by the end of the century is about 2.5 metres. That's the physically plausible upper rate.
That's 8 feet of sea level rise. The UK Environment Agency, the government body tasked with flood protection, recommended the barrier's life expectancy be extended from 2030 until 2070 to buy time.
Within the original design criteria for the barrier, there is enough allowance to actually mean that we've got another 40 years of that high degree of protection, but ease more life out of it.
But that was before the winter floods of 2013 increased the barrier's workload so much. More rain and rising seas will put still more strain on London's infrastructure.
You could get such a severe weather event that we've never seen before in this country, it could overwhelm our defences.
Even the best designed engineering solutions can't last forever. All of London's current defences will soon need upgrading or replacing.
Whether it's the barrier, all the walls in the centre of London or out to the estuary, you're daft if you don't think things have a life. You're daft when you don't plan for them coming to an end.
Increased and more intense rainfall. A massive, mostly concrete city surface. an aging, overused barrier system for the mighty but dangerous Thames River, and rising seas increasing the destructive power of storm surges. The UK is bracing itself for the 21st century with an array of solutions. Some low-tech, some among the most advanced in the world. This is the state-of-the-art Flood Forecasting Center. Senior team leader Brian Vinall and his group are armed with satellites, radar, and coastal gauges that give them up-to-the-minute information.
We have a lot of data and we have some very, very highly trained staff. They're the ones that have that decision as to whether to ring me and wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to say we need to start briefing government. It's up to them to decide what the response is. We tell them what the risk could be. We try and say how many properties might flood. We try and put it into context about this could be as bad as 1953.
The prime goal of Vinall and the Flood Forecasting Center is to make sure evacuation orders are given early enough to save lives.
We're not going to be able to tell an individual house whether they're going to flood in 4 or 5 days' time. What we can do is tell the emergency responders that there's probably going to be a community affected in this area. Now, you do get accused of cry wolf with that. You do get people who could potentially be evacuated and have no flooding happen. I'd much rather have that on my conscience.
Water is hitting London from all sides. The problem here is getting it out.
An awful lot of flood risk management is about moving water around to places or holding water up in places where it won't harm people and property. Where everywhere is underwater, then you start to have quite limitations on what you can do about it.
The government has a massive plan to tackle climate change this century. TE 2100 is the blueprint for keeping London from going underwater. The Thames Tideway Tunnel is one of London's most ambitious and expensive plans. It's a massive initiative designed to channel the water from overflowing sewers before it gets to the river, 200 feet below the Thames, and running along roughly the same path. It's a £4 billion project that will take 7 years to finish.
At the turn of the century here in London, the Victorian civil engineers were some of the earliest pioneers in providing fresh water and sanitation below the heart of our city. Now, that envisaged a certain quantum of population, but that has grown tenfold, 20-fold.
Managing a sewage network for 15 million people is obviously a massive challenge.
Rob Sainsbury and Pascal Lang are with Thames Water. The sewer system they oversee, run end-to-end, would stretch halfway around the world at the equator.
We're trying to make it as resilient as possible, but obviously there are times when we have extremely heavy rainfall where the system can't cope.
Many of the sewer lines carry channels for both sewage and stormwater, which is now a serious problem.
If we have a combination of rainwater and sewage, our sewage reaches capacity, and then that sewage then spills out of a manhole. If people are coming into contact with that sewage, that's obviously a public health concern.
The current sewer system was constructed in the late 19th century. It was designed principally to service 4 million people. And because of the way sewer systems are built, it's very difficult to retrofit them and upgrade them over time.
A fail-safe is a backup mechanism for when a system doesn't work. And in the case of London's flooding sewers, the fail-safe was overflow into the Thames. This unsanitary solution of the Victorian era still happens today, and it's a major health problem London urgently needs to fix.
So you have sewage going directly into the Thames, you have water quality going down, and at the same time you have all the water runoff, in order for it not to flood or to be backed up in the system, actually going directly into the River Thames. So that happens 50 times a year.
One goal of the Tideway Tunnel is to upgrade this antiquated system and ensure raw sewage no longer gets into the Thames by diverting the contaminated overflow to upgraded treatment facilities.
The Tideway Tunnel is London now getting its act together and trying to find a way to deal with this old sewer system. It's a tunnel 25 kilometers long, which lies across the London basin of the Thames. Its function is to allow for all the water runoff that comes from the drainage systems, in addition to the sewage, to be discharged into the sea. It's so expensive now to dig underground in London. People are put off because of the price tag. So in the future, unfortunately, we'll be forced to use it whether we like it or not, whether we like the price tag or not.
The Tideway Tunnel is projected to be finished in 2023. Meanwhile, London has other mega projects planned for the Thames.
The T2100 is looking at improving all the flood defences along the Thames estuary to improve both the riverbank, the embankment, the flood walls, and the sea walls and the coastal defences that are in the estuary itself, to then allow the barrier to carry on functioning until 2080, where the idea is that they will want to build a second Thames barrier.
Rather than building a new barrier now that's going to cost billions, they've said, let's delay the procedure. There's some things that they can do to extend the lifetime of the barrier. They can slightly overclock the gates. They can build new sort of defense schemes in and around the barrier. If sea level rise starts to accelerate and gets much higher than that, then obviously we've got to go down a different pathway. Now, the problem with this approach is it assumes that you can detect when sea levels are accelerating. And certainly with the original Thames barrier, it took 30 years to build, so there's a very long lead-in time.
Considering that lead time, the Environment Agency needs to make sure they have a clear picture of sea level rise. They've enlisted researchers like Dr. Ivan Haig to make sure they have the most accurate data. Haig observes fluctuations in sea level rise that may not be related to climate change. Some are part of natural annual patterns in the North Sea.
Sea level doesn't just rise smoothly and gently. Every year, sea levels rise as the ocean warms up in the summer, falls as the ocean cools down. So we can see every year it's rising and falling.
Okay, keep it coming.
Haig collects data on other factors involved in that fluctuation, like temperature, salinity, wind, and atmospheric pressure. He has to work out what is caused by climate change and what isn't.
The way I tend to picture it is, imagine you're at a party. There's 10 people in the room. Everyone's talking. Some people are talking very loud. So sea level is very noisy. The acceleration component is a small, quiet voice. So what we found is when we were able to remove 90% of the noise, we do now see a very clear, statistically significant acceleration signal. Over the 20th century, we saw about 1.7 millimeters per year. Now, in the last few decades, we're starting to see double that rate, about 3 millimeters per year. For the first time in the UK now, we are detecting that the rate is getting faster.
London's TE2100 plan is tackling rising seas and increased rainfall with multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects and with small-scale solutions. This project is called Sustainable Drainage Systems, or SUDS. Kevin Barton is a landscape architect working on SUDS, a localized approach to drainage becoming popular in London.
The problem in London, much like many cities around the world, is over the centuries we have paved over large parts of our landscape. We've created this impermeable barrier over our landscape, which means that when it rains, what we see is much larger volumes of water entering our sewer systems and eventually into our rivers. Plus, there's none of the slowing of that water that nature gives.
The problem when the rainwater falls is that sewers reach capacity, then they overflow into basements or onto street level. And of course, with sewerage, it's foul waste, so it's contaminated, which is even worse.
Jessica Bastock is the flood risk manager for Hammersmith and Fulham, a riverside district in London that is almost entirely paved over and prone to flooding.
So what we're trying to do here is to stop that from happening by relieving the pressure in the sewer and actually dealing with water, the rainwater that falls on the ground, sustainably.
SUDS offers a range of drainage solutions depending on the site.
This is Mendora Road, and along Mendora Road what we try to do is use permeable block paving to deal with water. All that is block paving, but instead of it being butted together, it's actually open, so water can flow between the blocks. And that means that when water falls, it runs through the block paving and gets stored underneath. We're on Bridget Joyce Square. Along this stretch of road now, there are multiple SUDS features.
On this side of Bridget Joyce Square, we have permeable block paving. In between the blocks, there are little gaps, and rainwater that falls on the surface actually moves through these gaps and then into the detention basin. When the basin starts to fill up during the intense rainfall events, there is an overflow point, so it will go back into the sewer system, but it will go at a really slow rate, so it will be a trickle. On this side of Bridget Joyce Square, we have a local school. To incorporate this school into the design, what we've done is we've taken the rainwater from the school building on the roof and we've disconnected the downpipes, which would normally have fed into the sewer system. We just channel it across, and then through little holes, they actually feed straight directly into the basin.
Another SUD scheme has been implemented about a mile away on Goldhawk Road.
This road, it's very, very busy. So in this kind of situation, what we've had to do is to have a sustainable drainage measure which can fit in this landscape. Engineered tree pits were thought to be the best way forward. They collect water from the carriageway and then they feed into the drain here, and then this is like a lateral drain, so a flat drain, and it feeds straight into the base of the tree pit here. And then underneath this tree pit is lots of box crate storage which holds water.
Kevin Barton believes SUDs will be commonplace across London by 2100, incremental steps with a big result.
Feels like we're on a steep curve at the moment where more and more people are cottoning on to SUDs. When you understand it saves money, it's good for developers as well as the environment and as well as for flooding. From everyone's perspective, SUDs is a no-brainer.
SUDs are good, but they're a soft solution. The difficulty sometimes is that if you have a flash flood incident and it rains and there's a large amount of rain in a short period of time, that in itself becomes an impervious surface. SUDs aren't able to deal with that type of water runoff, whereas a sewerage system can, specifically the Tidewood Tunnel.
As London looks to the future, it also looks to the past for overlooked options.
By the mid-19th century, most of the tributary rivers had become effectively open sewers, and they were heavily polluted, and they were faced with a public health crisis. Their response was to bury those rivers, pipe them up and build over the top of them. It also created more space because they could be built on top of, so it made way for development.
The project, run by David Harding, revolves around a network of lost rivers that lie beneath London.
London lost about 26 of its major tributaries, rivers like the Fleet and the Tyburn and the Walbrook. There were lots of cases where we were investigating flooding in the urban area where we couldn't really account for where all the flow came from because those rivers still do function as rivers when it rains.
And that's at the heart of many of today's flooding problems in London and other global cities built over rivers.
So what we've got to do now is to start to restore some of the more natural drainage of London. Rather than wait for these watercourses to reveal themselves when they flooded, go out and look for them proactively to understand where all the rivers had disappeared to. We start off from the LiDAR mapping, the digital terrain mapping, to look for telltale signs. The blue is the highest ground, going down to the yellow, which is the lowest ground. And you start to see what looks like a floodplain or a river valley with networks of tributaries coming off of it. We then start to refer to the historical mapping. So taking one of those potential flow pathways from the LiDAR data and referencing it to a map from 1846, you can start to see that the Salmons Brook is actually mapped when it coincides very well with the LiDAR data. And at this stage in the urbanisation, the river was still on the surface.
Guided by high-tech data, he takes the search from the office to the field. Harding is in a suburb of London where he hopes to find traces of the city's Victorian shape and structure.
So we're on Nestor Avenue now, where we believe that the Houndsdon gutter, a lost watercourse, flows to my left. If you put a river in a pipe or a channel, it's got a finite capacity. And when that capacity is reached, then that's when you start to get flooding coming out of things like manholes, flooding into properties and gardens and roads, as opposed to the natural watercourses which could flood out onto floodplains, which in many cases are still there. So if we could daylight some of these watercourses in the areas where they can be allowed to safely flood, then that reduces the flood risk to the built-up area
Daylighting means opening the river back up to its natural state, giving the water more room to flow. But since they've long been covered over, these rivers have disappeared from modern maps.
Okay, so the map has led us to the open section of the watercourse that's to my left, and there should be a pipe or a tunnel linking that to the next visible open section of watercourse. So we're just going to go down into the river now and walk the river and look for the existence of the tunnel.
Harding discovers that his software correctly identified the existence of a buried section of river.
This conduit that was built when the road was built, when the houses were built, this was just a way of putting in a nice straight line that was out of people's way. And it's typical of thousands of kilometres of ordinary watercourses across London.
Most of the people who live and work in these shops and cafes have no idea a river once ran through their community and may soon be flowing again.
There's no reason why they couldn't be restored to a more natural river corridor. Now that we know it's here, we can understand that any upstream flood risk that's caused by the throttling effect of this tunnel, and we can then look for opportunities to allow the river to spread out into our safe, open areas.
So far, over 11 miles of lost rivers in London have been daylighted. One of the best examples uses landscaping with earth bunds or embankments here at the Firs Farms wetlands in Enfield in North London.
We identified that using Firs Farm as a flood storage area, we could protect quite a significant number of people living downstream. We realised that instead of building a concrete wall, we could build a natural earth bund as a defence. And to generate the spoil that we needed to build that bund, we could carve out a channel, and that channel has now become the restored river.
Though the wetland is about 12 miles from the centre of London, the project is already having an impact, reducing the amount of rainwater flowing into the Thames system.
And we realised that using wetland planting, we could mitigate urban pollution. You can actually clean that water by passing it through a filter bed system. We've ended up with a combined wetland and flood storage area here. And by combining those two things, you get multiple benefits. You've got the permanent habitat, which is always here, the wetlands and the plants and the wildlife and so on. You've got an area that local residents can come and visit and enjoy on a day-to-day basis, but you've also got a functional landscape which actually stores tens of thousands of cubic metres of water during intense rainfall and protects people living downstream.
Harding sees this kind of organic approach to flood prevention as a necessary complement to large infrastructure like the barrier.
The scale of hard engineering that's needed to start to address flood risk through climate change now is becoming unfeasible. You know, we can't go for the big tunnel solutions forever. We need to start sort of rolling back some of the urbanisation and sort of managing flood risk in a more natural way, like this project does.
Another, more radical solution is not to battle the rising sea, but to work with it. Richard Coutts is an architect and urbanist specializing in floating architecture.
London is particularly under threat through climate change. We have sea level rise, and we're seeing more rainfall. We are building more, and the upshot of that is there's just not enough capacity in the system for this rainfall to go. To meet those challenges, we need to use the water space. We need to inhabit, we need to optimise our resources. Casting our minds forward to the next 50, next 100 years, one can imagine London thriving at the water's edge. New communities just growing, inhabiting the water space, be it parks, new homes, businesses, right in the heart of cities.
And Richard's secret weapon?
So we're looking at floating communities. And we've actually coined the phrase aquitecture, which is essentially architecture on water. So we're currently located in the Royal Docks of London. We are in a floating hotel. This was constructed in the turn of the 19th century. The Good Hotel is unique in terms of its thinking. It's a traditional industrial unit on a floating base. This was formerly a prison building that was birthed in Amsterdam. It was no longer fit for purpose. And this is one of the wonderful things with floating architecture. It has flexibility. You take it somewhere else, you give it a fresh lease of life, and from a building which previously people were fighting not to get in, we're now in a situation where people are paying a premium to dwell, to rest right on the water's edge.
Aquitecture is design that combines with water rather than resisting it. It's something Coutts believes is a solution in London's future.
We're looking at existing communities and how to make those resilient. We're looking at stilted houses and amphibious dwellings. And then at the other end of the scale, we're looking at floating and flood-resilient communities. This is the UK's first amphibious house, and it's built 8 metres from the River Thames, and is a house which is designed to rise and fall with the water. This is more of a practical approach which allows the people who live here to be within their garden and to be low, but in the event of a flood, the house is more responsive. The benefits of an amphibious house are, in the event of a flood, the house can float. It can literally move up and down. The garden is designed as an early warning system, and what we've got is a series of tiered planes, almost like buckets. When the first two fill, it actually triggers the buoyancy of the house.
Architecture that works with rather than against the water is an idea being considered by designers and engineers worldwide. Coutts believes that floating structures will be embraced by the world's most powerful players.
Floating cities. Those cities which really grow, those which are at the forefront, will be those that utilise water in that adaptable fashion to bring in a floating Olympics, to bring in those floating expos, to provide housing to meet the needs of their workforce in the middle of the city. And water provides that opportunity.
For decades, London trusted the Thames Barrier would keep it safe from water. Now, that sleeping giant can no longer be relied upon as rainfall increases and sea levels rise.
You know, the risk to London is huge. 1.25 million people, £375 billion worth of infrastructure. You know, there is 400,000 properties. You can just keep on going with the stats. We can't fail. We've got to get this right.
Still, the people of London aren't feeling as safe as they once did.
I think if it rains for more than 3 days in a row, I start thinking, is this going to be another one of those winters where we start getting rain after rain after rain?
The city's search for multiple solutions continues.
I think that the approach that the Victorians took, that you could always throw enough technology and enough concrete at a problem and you could overcome it. But there's an acceptance that that's not appropriate in all circumstances, and a more natural approach to flood risk management is the only one that's going to be sustainable in the face of more severe weather, rising sea levels, more prolonged wet periods.
We need clever architects, designers that can build cities that can cope with sea levels and almost make that part of the future design of the city.
The challenges are immense, as are the stakes, but London is ready for the battle.
In London, we need to make a few decisions. You can see we have some wonderful heritage, and we need to protect and defend that. So maybe in these areas, we maintain our flood defences. But in other areas of the city, we need the capacity in the system for this volume of water. And we may have to consider retreating, taking down some of those buildings, creating parts to provide additional storage. We can still use those as recreation, but we need to think more intelligently. We need our policymakers to keep up, to be with us on this journey as we deliver this very innovative infrastructure and new ways of living to enable our cities to grow.
So right now, the biggest challenge is to let planners, policymakers, the people who make decisions understand that we have to actually streamline these systems so they can function as one. And I think that alone is a big challenge of what London needs to do to move into the 21st century in its fullness. So adaptation challenges our current way of thinking. It challenges everything we think, we do, and say, based not only in the name of sustainability, but in the name of resilience.
Well, even for a wealthy city, this is going to be a challenge. They're going to have to watch this very carefully. It's going to require a significant amount of investment. That investment will be an increasing proportion of the economic activity in that city. And this is going to be the issue for the 21st century around a number of coastal cities.
Major funding for Sinking Cities is provided by Dr. P. Roy and Diana T. Vagelos, with additional funding from Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III. And the Mark Haas Foundation. Sinking Cities is also supported by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The big storm is more frightening than the gradual rise of water. Absolutely, and that's why we respond so intensely to the big storm and the hurricanes. It's a natural response.
The upside of living by the water has always outweighed the drawbacks. But while most residents are used to the flooding and heavy rains that come with tropical storms, they are now facing a new kind of flooding, which comes from below the ground, often when there's not a cloud in the sky.
We have three options. We protect. We try to build berms and walls and different areas. We accommodate the water. We build areas that can flood without damage. Or we retreat. If your place has been flooded 250 times a year, it's like, it's time to leave. We gotta get out of here.
You can't escape it. Water is coming from the side, from below, from above. And I think Miami is at that point where they've got to decide, how do we solve the issues of sea level rise?
We got to solve problems. We can't just talk about how bad they are. We have to also talk about what we're going to do to correct it.
In order to understand whether hurricanes are getting worse, we have to understand what they've done in the past.
Joanne Muller is a paleotempestologist. She's a scientist who studies the forensic record of ancient storms.
We're looking for evidence of past hurricane events to try to understand what the hurricane history is on the west coast of Florida.
Every major hurricane to ever hit Florida's coast has left behind a calling card, like the sediment buried deep beneath this lagoon. By sifting through the evidence of long-ago hurricanes, Muller will help Miami predict storms of the future. The world's great cities face threats they have never before encountered. New York, Tokyo, London, Miami. The threats come from the sea, from above, and from below. These are the problems and their solutions. For when the water comes. At their Florida Gulf Coast University lab, Joanne Muller's team analyzes sediment cores to create a timeline of hurricanes that happened centuries ago.
This is essentially the overwash that the hurricane has produced. So this is what the hurricane has brought back into the lagoon.
Muller is looking at samples from 1,000 years ago. From 950 to 1250 AD, the medieval warm period was a time when the Atlantic Ocean was warmer than usual. She finds that there's more sediment overwash and evidence of more hurricane activity in that period.
Well, what we're seeing here in Southwest Florida is time periods of activity and inactivity. And these time periods of activity are correlated with warmer sea surface temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic. So for example, during the medieval warm period, when sea surface temperatures were warmer, we see quite a few more overwash layers during that time period, whereas during the Little Ice Age, which was a relatively cooler period, sea surface temperatures were relatively lower out in the main development region. We don't see any overwash layers.
With Atlantic Ocean surface temperatures now rising, Muller's research indicates that Florida should expect more hurricanes in the 21st century.
So what this is telling us is that when sea surface temperatures are warmer, we tend to see more landfalling storms here in Southwest Florida. And we should be expecting more storms like this.
For Miamians, the upside of living by the water has always outweighed the drawbacks. But while most residents are used to the flooding and heavy rains that come with tropical storms, they are now facing a new kind of flooding, which comes from below the ground, often when there's not a cloud in the sky. It happens during what's called king tides. Locals just call it sunny day flooding.
The first time that happened, I was surprised because what you find is at the end of this road in particular, you'll find a bunch of water and big puddles.
Laura Pantano is a real estate agent. She lives in Shorecrest, a neighborhood in Miami on the shore of Biscayne Bay.
I really was ignorant about the king tide. I knew that the tide is controlled or influenced by the moon and the full moon, but I never realized how you could wake up in the morning like this and find water at the doorstep of your house for no other reason than the tide. And then I will find in my driveway all of the debris.
Like that, what you see here, that I have to clean up.
Because everything is literally on your house and it's sunny and you don't understand.
King tides are the higher than normal tides, which usually occur during a full or new moon. Because of rising sea level, high tides now often push up through Miami's drainage system and onto the streets, carrying debris along as they go. The water might then disappear between tides, only to flood back up again 12 hours later.
As the sea is rising, the same tides, they're riding on higher seas. So the water comes through those drains and pipes and pops up in the streets. There are some figures that say that a sea level rise in that area of Miami is 6 times faster than the global average. By 2030, it's expected that they will see about 50 tidal floods a year. And by 2045, about 250 times a year. Yeah. Can you imagine?
It's not seawater flooding, it's fresh water in the aquifer stored beneath the city, which is being pushed up by the rising tide.
Cities like Miami are a complicated machine. They try to keep salt water from the ocean from coming into the well zones, and they recharge the groundwater from rivers and canals. We need the groundwater to be high, sufficient for using it for water resources, but not too high. We need the rain, but not too much rain. So it's difficult to balance how they're going to maintain a thick enough lens of fresh water in the water table for water use and not let the sea level push it up out of the ground.
In Miami Beach, king tide flooding has increased 400% in the past 10 years. The underlying reason why Miami experiences increased flooding has to do not only with global sea level rise, but with the city's unique foundation. Doug Marcy has been studying sea level for more than 20 years.
This is fossiliferous limestone. It has calcium carbonate and quartz sand. Most of southeast Florida and the Miami-Dade area is built on top of this type of limestone. It's hard, and so it's good for building into, for high-rise structures and things like that. It's very porous, as you can tell. It has a lot of these holes that are basically kind of little mini caves, if you will. So to show you how porous this rock really is, if I pour this seawater into the top, it goes right through. Kind of like Swiss cheese. So groundwater doesn't flow that fast, but the main point is there's no impedance to the flow here.
Most of Miami and southern Florida sit on this giant bed of limestone. As the ocean levels rise, seawater pushes up through the porous rock. And as it continues to be forced up through the limestone, it will infiltrate the natural freshwater aquifer.
It actually can come up through storm drains and closed roads and cause transportation access problems. Also can cause problems with businesses and whatnot. So as the saltwater wedge moves in and drinking water wells come in contact with that, then they'll start to become higher salinity values and they won't be able to use that for drinking water anymore.
But it's not just salt contaminating Miami's drinking water. There's an even worse problem. 20% of Miami-Dade still uses septic tanks to collect sewage. And as the water seeps up to the surface, it gets into those tanks, causing the floodwater to mix with the sewage inside.
It's definitely not clear fresh water. It's muddy, it's for sure contaminated. And it travels to your house, to where your children walk barefoot.
The city of Miami advises residents not to come in contact with the floodwater and to wash immediately if they do. James Murley is Chief Resilience Officer for Miami-Dade County. By air, he can see the problems that surround the Miami area. Problems that were right there from the beginning.
When man intervenes in nature, you end up with a lot of unintended consequences. And we try to learn from the mistakes we made in the past.
One of those mistakes was the removal of the mangrove forests, nature's protection for coastlines. This is what Miami looked like before it was developed.
All along here, everything you see green is mangrove. Mangroves are very valuable. They break down the storm surge coming in. It's much cheaper to maintain mangrove forests than it is to build concrete. Build concrete walls or dikes.
The mangroves are Miami's prehistory, which needs to be restored. It's the city's human impact that is destined to be destroyed.
What we see coming up is a mobile home park. They were built decades ago in a time when people thought we could keep the water out. But now we know we can't do that.
The most vulnerable areas are also Miami's most valuable. Even at a glance, it's clear they will be underwater when the ocean rises.
This is in the city of Coral Gables. It's their most expensive real estate. We understand the value of this real estate in terms of real estate taxes. But we also realize that those decisions we made decades ago to allow this kind of development right on the coast, we're not going to keep doing that. If we were to experience a huge catastrophic storm, then we'd have to relook at how we redevelop. It may be better in the future to relocate those most vulnerable areas.
Dr. Karen Bolter is a climate scientist who was born and raised in Miami. She was alarmed to see how climate change was transforming her city while being ignored by many.
When I learned about climate change, it blew my mind that all of these dramatic changes were happening and people still were wondering whether it was a problem. And once I had kids, I realized it was my life mission to get people to wake up and understand what's happening.
Bolter has modeled how sea level rise will affect Miami-Dade County through the next century, based on predictions from NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
So these tools and this data is a really good communication method to show what's happening. We already see 20 days a year that just high tide, the water is higher than the land. And how does that increase in the future? 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise basically takes downtown Miami, Miami Beach, and puts it below sea level. And these areas are where the movie stars live and the famous people. These are the low-lying areas, but they stand out not only because of that, but because they have the resources. This is very high property value, the highest in all of Florida. But if you look further north, we have these vulnerable areas. What I did was I actually modeled low-income populations at low elevation. And what I found was there's a huge hotspot in this area.
The hotspot is only 15 miles from Miami Beach. Much of the population here lives below the poverty line.
So there's a huge social vulnerability and physical vulnerability in this kind of hotspot. These are the people that will be truly displaced.
My name is Eric Bason, and I'm a community activist working around issues on climate change and sea level rise.
Eric Bason is among those living in Miami's most vulnerable area.
Well, the community is low-income communities, and members such as myself are highly affected because we don't have the resources when, like, a flood happens. I try to educate community members about what's accessible to them when they're having meetings and at City Hall to make sure that they go and have their voices heard so that more resources could come down to help low-income communities like mine. Somebody's paying for the roads to be fixed. So somebody's paying for flood prevention.
People who live here want to make sure they get their fair share of that money.
There's a lot of money being given for low-income communities to offset their flooding, but it doesn't seem to go down to these communities. And when you vote for these people, you hire them, and it's our responsibility to hold them accountable, and especially for poor people if they plan on getting any help. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's just that simple.
As Miami's Chief Resilience Officer, Jane Gilbert recognizes that low-income communities are much more vulnerable to the rising sea.
Just under 30% of the city of Miami population is living at poverty level or less. And I would say a little over 60% have a hard time meeting basic needs, whether it's rent or childcare or transportation, because we have very high costs of both housing and transportation costs. The majority of our population is having a hard time making ends meet. So that needs to be built into our resilience strategy as part of it.
For all its citizens, Miami needs a plan to survive. According to current projections, sea level rise will impact Miami more than any other city in the U.S. Miami could experience as much as a 3-foot rise by 2080 and as much as a 6-foot rise by 2100.
This is an extremely frightening scenario. It's scary to even think that as a worst-case scenario, it's possible. And the fact that it's possible, we need to consider it. And even more alarming, further south, we happen to have right along the coastline a nuclear power plant, Turkey Point. All of the cooling canals and the surrounding areas are extremely low, so there's a really big vulnerability for the nuclear power plant. It's a little scary for me, living so close to a nuclear power plant that is that low-lying.
Miami-Dade Chief Resilience Officer James Murley is also worried about Turkey Point.
So the plant was built there in 1976, and it's cooled by a large area of cooling canals. So it probably wouldn't be the way we would permit it today. But, you know, that's what we have to live with. We'd like to have cooling towers. That may be in the future. But that's where we are.
Miami is also considered the most at-risk city worldwide for potential property damage due to rising sea level and storm-related flooding. More than $416 billion in real estate is at risk here.
If you look at downtown Miami right now, you see crane after crane after crane, and you see new construction after new construction. Gleaming towers rising out of the bay. You think to yourself, wait a second, who's buying this? Who's selling? Aren't these people crazy? How can they be plunking this amount of money into it? We're gonna get probably 2 feet of sea level rise by 2060. And by 2100, we might get 6 feet of water. And none of this construction is, by law, required to take into account that sea level rise within its design.
So we have to look at infrastructure, we have to look at building and land use codes, and we have to do a lot around citizen resident outreach, education, information.
If Miami Beach is underwater within the next century, these buildings are doomed.
How much is the real estate at Miami Beach worth when the beach is gone? So I think that Miami Beach goes eventually. If you look at the incomes of people in Miami Beach, North Miami, the high income zone is still along the saltwater shore zone.
It's only a matter of time before these houses, along with their mortgages, end up underwater.
But when your bathroom doesn't work anymore, can your house retain its value? Somebody has to give them the economic signal that those properties are losing value. Until they feel it, like the bank says to them, you know what, your house isn't worth the mortgage that you have for it. So we'll see what happens to a lot of people as this slower moving trend starts to become a real issue in the very thin crust of infrastructure in Miami.
Today, developers continue to build on Miami's most vulnerable ground, and buyers keep demanding those condos with a view. But developers are focused on the immediate future, not beyond. There's no long-range plan other than build, sell, repeat.
So are these pieces of real estate the equivalent of junk bonds? Are these investments that people are never going to see a return on? At some point, the Miami real estate market is going to really have to start integrating accurately the price of rising sea levels into how much stuff costs.
That may already be happening. A recent study found that houses on the coast now sell for 7% less than houses in the interior. But what isn't changing is the high demand for property here.
So who's buying in Miami? Well, the honest answer is that sometimes we really don't know. Miami has two property markets. One is the market for people like you and me who are looking for a place to live, and the other is the market for the world's 1%. They're looking for a place to plunk their money. Something like 2/3 of the properties in the city are actually owned by limited liability corporations whose provenance is opaque. We don't know who owns these places. It's a great haven for offshore funny money from developing countries and people trying to escape taxes in those places, putting money in Miami.
Miami is no stranger to resourceful, if not shady, business deals. Its very inception was a huge risk.
If you look at Miami-Dade County today, you've got millions of people living in what was the swamp. This map depicts Florida at the time of 1835 to 1842. The Everglades was massive. It measured from Lake Okeechobee down to Florida Bay about 4 million acres of swampland. There were mosquitoes everywhere. So again, there's just really nobody here. There's really, other than the coastal area, there's no place you can really live. You can't live in the swamp.
In 1891, an Ohio businesswoman named Julia Tuttle moved there and began lobbying another Ohioan, Henry Flagler, to extend his railroad to the coast. Flagler enlisted Bahamian and other migrant workers to build the railway, which reached the Atlantic coast by 1896. Then, in the early 1900s, another entrepreneur from the north, Carl G. Fisher, arrived and really got things going. Fisher cut down the mangrove forests and dredged sand from the bottom of the bay to fill the swamp. Miami Beach was born. Carl Fisher turned a swamp into a dream. And almost immediately, Miami's fragile beginnings crack with the arrival of a devastating storm.
The mighty hurricane of 1926, it did tremendous destruction to the area. The damage is unreal. An estimated 10,000 people were homeless and thousands of structures were uninhabitable at the time. The flooding was incredibly severe.
Over 300 people died in that 1926 hurricane. Adjusted for inflation, it caused more than $100 billion worth of damage. Hurricanes hit Florida from June to November every year. But the biggest storm of all still strikes fear into the hearts of South Floridians. Hurricane Andrew in 1992. It's a night that changed the lives of Miami's Peterson family.
The evening before the storm hit,
I think we were at a store.
We were out to dinner, I believe.
Something, but
And
we
then
didn't take it as seriously.
We heard the news was on maybe the television that was in the restaurant, and it said that Hurricane Andrew has taken a severe turn to the west.
But Hurricane Andrew suddenly changed course and intensified, confounding the experts. The state quickly called for an evacuation of more than 1 million residents.
The police came and they said, if you're not leaving, give us next of kin, please. So
that kind of sealed the deal.
But the Petersons, unable to move quickly enough, found themselves trapped in their home with no way to protect their young son.
And this is Brian, he was 4.
So get in your closets, put the mattresses over the opening of the closet, and protect yourself from any debris when your windows break, and your windows will break.
I remember my dad having to carry me on his shoulders, the water being so high that it was up to his chest, and me sitting on his shoulders, I could feel it on my toes, and I'll never forget how cold the water was. I remember the roof being gone. I remember the entire neighborhood looked like somebody had just flattened it out of a pop-up book.
And I remember my son saying, you can go through a hurricane and think you die. Because we would have pillows on him in case any, it was scary. Still bring tears to me.
A wall of seawater rushed in. 173-mile-per-hour winds sent deadly debris hurtling through the air.
In the middle of the night, while we were watching out the window, we saw the green lightning, which wasn't really green lightning. It was the power substations exploding.
Andrew left Miami in ruins. 25,000 houses destroyed. More than 100,000 others damaged. It left 15 people dead.
The building code had been insufficient for that type of a windstorm, so structures were built in a way that the roofs weren't capable, flew right off. There was plenty of evidence of what we needed to do to tighten up our building code and other standards.
The damages were enormous, totaling $27 billion. Enough to put 8 insurance companies out of business. At the time, it was the most expensive natural disaster to strike the United States, only surpassed by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Now, as sea levels rise, the storm surge experienced when Andrew hit would be even more devastating. A quarter century later, Miami is still not fully prepared. September 7th, 2017. Hurricane Irma barreled toward Miami. It was the 9th named storm of the year for this area.
We were thinking of water surge of, 20, 30 feet, which means, it's a whole house, it's gone. I was prepared for the worst.
Facing the prospect of a Category 5, the most intense storm possible, Miami did the only thing it could: evacuate. Irma battered the city with powerful winds. Water poured into the streets. Nearly the entire city went dark. In the aftermath of that storm, Miami was forced to reckon with catastrophic damage.
This road was completely flooded, completely. We're talking 2 feet height of water.
But the most shocking fact was that Irma didn't even hit Miami directly. It shifted course at the last second. Now, even near misses are leaving Miami underwater. One of Florida's biggest challenges is a hurricane phenomenon called rapid intensification. All Atlantic hurricanes start near Africa, and most grow or dissipate predictably as they make the crossing. But as they approach the Gulf of Mexico, they encounter warmer waters. Together with other weather conditions, such as wind shear, rapid intensification becomes deadly. And as forecasters know, it's almost impossible to predict.
The nightmare scenario is the storm that intensifies rapidly and catches people by surprise.
Brian House does research in an attempt to predict rapid intensification with more accuracy.
The relatively simple explanation is what, it's the heat coming off the ocean. The heat takes the form of the temperature, the sensible heat we call it, and then the more critical component for development of a hurricane is the latent heat, the water that is evaporated. So I think that's probably the part that maybe not as well understood, is really the evaporation at the surface. Then it's also slowed down by the interaction with the ocean itself, the waves on the ocean. That's the friction that it's spinning over.
Despite centuries of hurricane research, predicting rapid intensification is still next to impossible. Cracking that code may help preserve Miami's future.
And you need to know these things as soon as possible, because you can't make these decisions at the last minute in a place where 4 million other people are making the same decision as you, and there's 2 roads to get out. So the sooner we can get good forecasts that everybody can trust, the sooner the people can make intelligent choices about whether they are evacuating their house, to what level they protect their house.
A wave generator at the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences allows House to collect data he can't get from real hurricanes.
What's unique about our facility here is we can take a decently sized chunk of water and we can recreate controlled hurricane conditions over the top of that chunk of water and really try to understand what happens right at the interface. And we can use that information in computer models to predict the intensity of the storm. A lot of these processes, the heat transfer and the spray generation, all that, are really happening at small scales. We can create those conditions here, and we can understand what's happening right at the interface, this spray that's coming off, and how that contributes to the transfers of heat up into the storm, and also how it contributes to the way that the storm feels the friction of the surface. We can generate a wind up to a really intense Category 5 hurricane, up to 200 miles an hour. This interface between the air and the water where a lot of the action happens. You see all this spray that's starting to be generated here at these intense conditions that just is thrown up into the air.
House has learned that sea spray is a key component of intensification. When wind kicks up the spray, the heat in it is transferred to the atmosphere above. That heat helps fuel the storm.
There is a significant increase in the amount of rapid intensification. This year it happened with almost every hurricane. Miami has a lot to worry about in the future.
Stronger and more frequent hurricanes. Gradual loss of the most exclusive shoreline in Florida. sunny day flooding through porous limestone bedrock. These are the problems Miami faces. To survive, Miami needs to adapt and to find new solutions, or risk being lost to the rising sea. The development along Miami's shores is still primarily vertical towers, rising out of its Swiss cheese limestone foundation. However, an increasing number of them are designed with resilience in mind.
So if you're talking about a dense urban downtown where you have lots of high-rises, you can invest in infrastructure to raise things, build strong flood barriers and pump and piping systems, and raise roads over time to live with that water.
With our project Grove at Grand Bay, we raised the terra firma, or the ground level, 20 feet into the air.
The Grove at Grand Bay is one of dozens of condos being built on the water in Miami. But it's not like any condo that came before it. Project leader Kai-Uwe Bergman's design is part of Miami's ambitious new building code for the 21st century.
Because of sea level rise, the city is literally acknowledging that that will occur, and that properties that are being developed now actually move higher.
All new developments along the city's coast must be raised by almost 13 feet. They must also be built to withstand flooding without being crippled in the event of a 15-foot storm surge.
The plan does stipulate that any of the sort of mechanical rooms are above the flood stage, or in this case, the ground floor.
Miami's plan is just a Band-Aid in the face of rising seas. The city needs to look much further into the future if it hopes to survive the inevitable.
So we have a Citizen Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee that is made up of engineers, ecosystem naturalists, land use attorney, architect, developer, someone representing some of our low-income communities, and they're advising us on policies, advising our commission on how to approach it.
But it'll take much more than committees and consultations to stop the water that's already at Miami's doorstep.
You can't escape it. Water is coming from the side, from below, from above. And I think Miami is at that point where they've got to decide, how do we solve the issues of sea level rise? I do, however, think that we as humans, if we're posed a challenge and there's a way to solve it, we will find the energy, the resources to do it.
While coastal real estate has always been Miami-Dade's most desirable, some buyers now prefer higher ground, where they won't be as affected by flooding, whether from storm surge or from rising sea level. The term climate gentrification has been coined to describe how some people move away from the shore into traditionally less desirable, lower-income neighborhoods.
Liberty City is a predominantly African American and Latino community. When they originally built Miami, the beach was supposed to be for the affluent tourists and things like that, so we were not allowed to be on the beach. Because of racism and redlining, they pushed us to the center of the city. And now they're trying to take it away after all these years when they didn't want it, because the place that they love so much is going to be underwater. We're starting to see a lot of developers come in and buy up blocks at a time, taking over communities.
The gentrification that's been transforming neighborhoods across America has taken a unique twist in Miami.
Climate change gentrification in Miami would be funny if it weren't so sad. It's the sort of thing where, because of redlining and racist housing practices historically in the United States, You have minorities being confined to the less desirable areas on the coastal ridge, away from the nice beaches and the nice sea breezes and stuff. And now that everybody's realizing, like, hey man, this whole beach thing might not really work out while the water's rising, these areas have been gentrified in an amazingly rapid rate.
My family has been in Miami for generations.
Gunda is worried that climate change gentrification will force her and her neighbors from their homes and erase a vital part of Miami's culture.
My family's been in Overtown, they've been in Liberty City, they've been in Lemon City, they've been in Little Haiti for years. My Miami is the west side of the Causeway, where the cameras usually don't come or people don't think about when they think about Miami. My Miami is everyday working people, hundreds of cultures, children playing outside. It doesn't look like South Beach. It's not lined with beautiful palm trees and million-dollar hotels and a beautiful, clean beach. Even though we're 15 minutes away from the beach, I can name hundreds of people who've never been there, and they've been here their entire lives.
60% of Miami is living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck, and fully 66% of the city rents. They don't own their house.
Which leaves people like Valencia Gunder no choice but to move to a more vulnerable area as the money moves into her neighborhood.
Now, all of the working class families in Miami, or most, are being pushed to lower lying areas. So if you have a sunny day flooding or even a very rainy incident, it's gonna take you twice as long to get from your house to work. That's a cost on society, that's a burden.
Rich or poor, officials in Miami face the challenge of making sure everyone is protected from Miami's rising sea.
We are currently designing infrastructure for the next 40 to 50 years to 2.5 feet of sea level rise over that time. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 40 to 50 years. Projections are going to change. We're going to have to recalibrate our projections every 5 years based on new scientific information. Policy can happen, technology can happen, and frankly, you know, most cities, a long-range plan is a 20-year plan. We're doing a 40 to 50-year plan.
Miami Beach is fighting sea level rise on 3 fronts, with one of the most ambitious public works projects in the United States.
This is a very exciting time for an engineer to actually see what they've designed and actually seeing it actually come together.
When Bruce Mowry was the chief engineer of Miami Beach, he had the Herculean task of keeping the most vulnerable area in all of Miami dry. He oversaw the installation of a series of pumps along Indian Creek Drive, following a canal just west of the beach. It's part of a huge new pumping system.
We have a total of about 70, so we're going to be building about 40 more pump stations throughout the city over the next 3 to 5 years. This will sustain a much drier street for us and a better quality of life for our residents and businesses.
The pumps are part of a $500 million initiative to send seawater from the streets into the nearby canals at a rate of about 5 million gallons per minute, reducing the impact of king tides. Miami's first challenge is to get all that water out of the city and back into Biscayne Bay.
Then the way that it works is after the pump station treats the water collected to the entire drainage system, that pump station pushes the water through an underground system and discharges into the bay after treatment.
The water from the pump station gets sent to a treatment station south of the city's core, where it gets purified with waste held in tanks. The clean water then gets pumped back into Biscayne Bay.
We can't retrieve 1 inch. We don't have any land available to say, we'll let that part go. We need to defend at the waterfront now.
The second front of the plan involves raising seawalls along Miami's canals and creeks.
This wall was constructed approximately 75 years ago, and this was a level in which they were anticipating tides or high waters to come in. During high tide, water will actually come over here. And so we're looking at a wall well over 4, almost 5 feet higher than the existing walls built 75 to 100 years ago. We believe it's necessary because of what the expected sea level rise, that this is going to be our standard requirements. This is a very direct indication of how climate change and sea level rise is changing the conditions in this world.
But because of Miami's porous foundation, even Miami's Chief Resilience Officer, Jane Gilbert, is skeptical that raising seawalls is an effective long-term solution.
Even if you have the barrier there, the water comes up from behind and creates its own flooding event. So we need to learn over time to live with that water.
Living with the reality of rising water requires a third front in the battle, something far more radical.
What the city has done is they actually went into some of those low-lying streets and started raising them incrementally. Now, what we're raising today may not be the final elevation 50 to 100 years from now, but it's not appropriate to try to raise in a developed city all at one time.
The greatest challenge in Miami Beach is the substrate of our soil. We live on a barrier island made out of limestone, coral, and sand. The water's coming up as much as it's coming over any seawall, and if we don't elevate our land and literally have our infrastructure above the water, it's going to come in and flood anyway.
The best example of elevation can be found in Miami Beach's Sunset Harbor neighborhood.
This was the most vulnerable area of our community at the time. The area we're standing in now during high tide events would be water in the streets. We literally see people kayaking in the streets. It was so low, so we started here, and this area was raised 30 inches in many spots.
This restaurant's patio was once popular for people watching. Now its tables are below street level.
The elevation difference between where I'm standing and what you can see was the original elevation of the sidewalks and streets. So when we finish these neighborhoods, we bring soil in from the mainland. We'll install underground pipes. We'll build our road bed, our drainage structures, and pave the road, and it'll be 30 inches higher.
Sunset Harbor is a 6-block neighborhood in South Beach. Raising the streets there took 2 years and $27 million.
That's 2 years of roads blocked, a lot of dust from road construction, noise, just interrupting normal life routine. But the bottom line, they suffer for 2 years to rebuild a community like this in exchange for 30 years of security.
Many believe it's too little, too late, and that a 30-year lifespan is too short before the rising seas force Miami Beach to do it all over again.
The problem is that sea level rise is going to continue. So raising your city is kind of like walking a plank. It works as long as you don't get to the end of it. And the sea level rise dynamic is going to continue. So I don't think they can raise themselves out of the problem maybe more than 3-5 feet. And even with that, they have to be ready for serious hurricanes and the more extreme rainfall events project for the future, which are raising their groundwater. And that's a very important piece of the flooding problem.
One of Hill's strategies for living with rising groundwater has already been tested in the Netherlands.
I think that we can use earthworks, landforms, to structure areas that are safe, where water ponds, and then we can float urban districts in those safe ponds. I'm not talking about floating stuff in the Atlantic Ocean. And the Dutch idea of canals is a great one because it mostly relies on gravity to drain groundwater out of high water table zones. But that would be a way for us to adapt to living with more water.
Miami-Dade Chief Resilience Officer James Murley has looked at the Dutch model of building dikes, canals, and levees, but doesn't think that it will work in Miami due to its unique geology.
The idea of building dikes or levees with the porous limestone means that they're not going to be nearly as efficient as dikes and levees in other parts of the country. They will have an effect of lessening an onrushing storm surge, but the water itself is going to go right underneath through the lime rock, and it's going to raise the freshwater water table. And you know, it's a situation that is unique to our geology, and we have to work with that as we move forward.
You can elevate houses, you can elevate buildings, you can elevate roads. People are doing it all over the country, all over the world. They're elevating whole buildings. But can you elevate all of the buildings of Miami Beach? I don't know. And if you elevate it and the limestone underneath is all full of salt water, you're gonna have to pump water from way inland. So there are all these things that you have to consider.
The city of Miami Beach is committed and planning to overcome the challenges long-term, no matter what the cost.
All the South Florida people are very strong-willed, resilient people. The people in this community in Miami Beach have determined that retreat from sea level rise is not an option at this point. We will rise above and we will stay.
One building here is a shining example of what Miami could do to face the future. The Perez Art Museum opened in 2013, when the reality of a sinking, storm-battered Miami became accepted by most residents. The museum's designers faced that challenge head-on.
Here we're standing on the south side of PAM, the Perez Art Museum, Miami, right at our front doors. To the east of me is Biscayne Bay. We are a modern art museum. The art starts at 22 feet above sea level, with the second level of art being at 40 feet above sea level. The materials that were used are unbelievably solid to withstand major weather conditions. Certainly the concrete used throughout the entire structure, any wood that was used on the building could sustain both wind and water.
While the structural materials defend against sea level and storms, other features work with water, ushering it into cisterns that are used to irrigate the grounds and then funneling any excess water quickly back out to the bay.
As we're walking toward the east of our building, you'll notice that the ground that we're walking on are basically like concrete planks. That's to allow water to flow underneath the structure to the PAM garage. We are at exactly 8 feet above sea level at level 0 in the PAM garage. We have a gravel surface here, and the idea behind this was to allow the water to drain as quickly as possible. So we do have a generator, so PAM will never be without power. And I think about PAM a lot of times like a hospital, that we have art that is living and breathing and needs 70-degree temperature, 50% humidity at all times, and allows the art to be safe.
The Perez Art Museum proved its worth during Irma.
We see some pretty good waves hitting the wall.
I'm Mark Rosenblum, and I'm part of the museum ride-out crew.
Sunday at about 9:30 as Hurricane Irma right now passing through the Keys. Tidal surge is coming in. Building's been holding up good through the night.
We've learned a lot. We've changed our procedures over the years, but the building has sustained no damage since we've moved in. We would never change our location. We wear it as a badge.
The big storm is more frightening than the gradual rise of water. Absolutely, and that's why we respond so intensely to the big storm and the hurricanes. It's a natural response.
According to CalDAS, Miamians should be less concerned about hurricanes and more worried about sea level rise.
It is more important to consider tidal flooding than it is hurricanes. A hurricane can come or cannot come, but the tide comes in every day. And it's only getting worse. The measurements are there, the data are there. It's only going to get worse and fast. So we have 3 options. We protect. We try to build berms and walls and different areas. We accommodate the water. We build areas that can flood without damage. Or we retreat, which is the last resort thing that you have to do. If your place has been flooded 250 times a year, it's like, it's time to leave. We gotta get out of here.
You start thinking, okay, what if I don't have my car? What if I don't have my job? Because if there's no houses to sell, no condos to sell, that's my livelihood. What if I don't have a home to return to?
What we found is people are going to ask for the opportunity to retreat. They weren't being told to leave. They were saying, we'd prefer to leave. They were willing to sell their property and move. That could change in the future, but that's sort of where we find ourselves today. So there's a lot of thinking going on. There's a lot of different options being considered.
Everybody's doom and gloom. They're all saying sea level rise, climate change, it's going to be the end of all coastal communities. You'll never, ever be able to save the city of Miami Beach. And I'm saying no, that doesn't have to be. We got to solve problems. We can't just talk about how bad they are and how much worse they're going to get. We have to also talk about what we're going to do to correct it.
Eric Besson says he will stand his ground, no matter what.
I'm not planning on moving. I'm planning on fighting for people in my community, low-income communities, to live the best life possible.
I would say that I'm more hopeful than I am worried. Maybe that's just because I'm an optimistic, positive person, but I do see humanity in a way that there's so much potential and there's so much innovation. There are solutions that we don't even know exist. And once we have the willpower, the movement, we're gonna find them. And America, the world, is not gonna let Miami go.
Major funding for Sinking Cities is provided by Dr. P. Roy and Diana T. Vagelos, with additional funding from Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, and the Mark Haas Foundation. Sinking Cities is also supported by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations and by viewers like you. Thank you.